good angle at least.
3 counties, 24 cities, working together, accomplishing more than any of us could alone. Whether your roots run generations deep, or you recently moved to Greater Portland, you are a part of Metro, the nation's only regional government elected by the people. Planning for the future, preserving what we love. Let's keep our region thriving for decades to come.
I'm Laura Lepley, a Metro Park Ranger. Here at Oxbow Park, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Welcome Center and you're at the Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Oxbow Park.
Okay, well, declare a quorum and call the Metro Council business meeting to order. We'll now ask our clerk, Georgia Langer, to please call the roll for attendance.
Yes. Counselor Simpson.
Present, good morning.
Counselor Lewis.
Present.
Counselor Rosenthal.
Present.
Counselor Nolan should be joining shortly, and Counselor Gonzalez should be joining a little bit later, and Acting Council President Wong.
Present. Thank you. Okay, well, before we begin our business today, colleagues, I'd like to ask for your consideration in changing the order of business in today's agenda. I propose that we conduct COO communications and council communications after consideration of a consent agenda, and that we specify the budget committee will convene at 10:30. Are there any objections to this proposal?
No.
I love it.
All right, strong support.
I've been very strong in saying that we should not rush through council communications.
Great. Okay, well, let's move on to public communications. We'll open the floor to public communications on non-agenda items. Georgia, could you please describe to the audience our procedures that we will use for public communications?
Absolutely. If you are testifying on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. If you are testifying in person, please sign up by filling out a blue card in the back of the room and bringing it up to me. If you are testifying on Zoom or by phone, please sign up by using the raise hand functions in the reactions or more menus, or by dialing *9. When it is your turn to testify, I'll call on your name or phone number. For those on Zoom, click accept to be promoted to a panelist. Your Zoom window will close briefly before you rejoin as a panelist, and you can turn on your camera if you'd like. Testimony is limited to 3 minutes, and the timer begins when you begin speaking. If you are testifying in person, there are timers located on your testimony table, on the wall, and on the digital screen. Please state your name for the record before testifying. You do not need to give your physical address. And Acting Council President Wong, we have not received any folks who've signed up in advance to testify. I don't see anyone in the audience, and there are no hands raised on Zoom.
Great, thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to our consent agenda. We have 4 items on today's consent agenda. Resolution number 26-5583 for purpose of confirming the reappointment of Abe Vega to the Metro Committee on Racial Equity, consideration of the March 5th, 2026 council meeting minutes, consideration of a March 10th, 2026 council meeting minutes, and consideration of the March 12th, 2026 council meeting agenda or meeting minutes. Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's moved by Councilor Simpson and seconded by Councilor Lewis. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Okay, and the motion passes unanimously. All right, we'll start then with COO Communications. Good morning.
Good morning, Council. Is my mic on? Okay. My main communication to you today is later in this meeting when we deliver the budget message. But just wanted to thank everybody for attending the Metro Mixer up at the zoo. It was a beautiful day and a beautiful chance to connect with city managers and elected officials and other interested parties throughout the region. And I think that in creating those spaces, huge shout out to GAPD, because I think Metro is stepping into a space of really creating time and space for connection, which is still really hard to achieve, I think, in the post-pandemic world. I think it's folks have fallen out of some of those habits. So for us to be able to provide that space and structure for people, I just continue to get really good feedback about that. So thank you for being game and being part of that, and thanks to the GAPD team for always putting on a great event.
Great event.
Agreed.
Okay. Councilor Communications. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. Colleagues, I need to report back from the Region 1 ACT meeting that took place Monday evening. And if you'll remember, the ACTs across the state are in the process of developing their CIP lists so that ODOT statewide can have a CIP list for about the next decade. The original ask had been 5 projects per ACT, and then ODOT changed their criteria and said, give us up to an additional 10. So we had our March meeting discussing the potential extra 10 projects that R1 ACT could submit. Then lo and behold, Monday, ODOT didn't change their number of projects that they're requesting, but they did propose an alternate theory of how ACT could put together their list, including prioritizing programs, which is very much in alignment, I think, with kind of how we prioritize things in the region, and particularly on things like jurisdictional transfer, safety projects, pavement improvement. It just makes sense to keep kind of a priority list that's a program and not a project list. But the way that ODOT rolled this out was to email the chair and the co-chair at 4 p.m. before a 5:30 meeting. Didn't provide any additional material to the rest of us on the R1 ACT. It led to a very messy presentation, a very messy meeting. So long story short, there will be some interim work group. I have volunteered some Metro staff to engage on this process. City of Portland has volunteered their staff. Multnomah County has volunteered their staff. But we have time to have a special meeting because this is not due yet for another couple of weeks. But you may hear, particularly from your larger jurisdictions that are involved with trying to do jurisdictional transfers, because jurisdictional transfer did not make what Chair Savas called the first cut of priorities. And I spoke up that I wanted us to be on pause and not approve anything else until we dealt with jurisdictional transfer and found consensus on that being a priority either as a program or as individual projects. So lots of difficult conversations coming out of that meeting, and you will likely hear from other jurisdictions involved. So that's my main update. Want to lift up that the Oregon Zoo Foundation Board is still currently meeting. They, I believe, are joined not only by the members of the board, but by a newt today. And we're very active in discussing priorities of how their funds can partner most effectively, not only through membership, but also thinking about how to plus up the bond and look at the bond investments in places where they can top off bond projects. And then last and not least, I would like to just use this moment to celebrate that schools across the Portland area, including Roosevelt, Park Rose, and Franklin, are sending students to two very prestigious debate tournaments at Harvard and University of Kentucky this weekend. And I wish all of those teams, all four of those teams, well.
Well, thank you, Chair Lewis, for representing us at R1 Act. I know it's always a hard conversation there.
That one was like, it's not, that one was wild because it was a challenging conversation to even figure out what the conversation was.
I think it was some of the most contentious meetings I've watched was when Councilor Craddock was at R1 Act.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to report that the Metro staff made a presentation on the future vision process to the West Side Economic Alliance this morning. The chair of the executive director expressed some concerns that there was not sufficient representation from economic interests, and Ed Trumke made the point that we define region often by the economic watershed. In other words, the job watershed, that is we have to lead with economics. So there was some concern and some discussion, but there was an overall consensus that the economic interests that are represented by WEA and others should be very active over the next 6 months in participating, answering the questionnaires, and getting involved in this future vision process.
Great, thank you. And then I was also in Washington County doing a presentation to the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, who I've never had the privilege of visiting. So it was a fun drive out and conversation. And what else? Any other councilor communications? Well, I'm also excited that I'll be meeting with our senior leadership team later today to talk about some of the new kind of culture shifts, time shifts, like to have more time for discussion, and being sure we bring in, experts and data for deeper dives into conversation, which I think we'll see over the next couple months. But yeah, colleagues, is there anything else that we want to be talking about with the senior staff leadership? I don't know if this is appropriate, but.
Sure.
Okay, we got 10 minutes. We also have, we're planning some council retreats where we're going to talk about some of the procedures around, working with staff. We had a potential code of conduct conversation, and then what other items were we thinking about? I think those are kind of the big ones for a council retreat. So yeah, is anything from a good of order in terms of retreat time or time with senior leadership? If you have any thoughts, now's a good time. Mm-hmm. Like how we do business, in the coming months and years type thing.
Yeah. I think you're right to point out a code of conduct conversation would be well-timed. And I also think in terms of how we as staff, how we as a council office are engaging staff to help us with our priorities. We've had this conversation before, but I think it has gotten a little clunky when trying to request approval in this body in order to avoid serial meetings. Not needing to get into the weeds, but just needing to say, look, I could have up to X number of hours to dive deeper on the subject without having to fully explain. So,
Right. Okay.
figure that one out.
The third item besides the code of conduct and staff time was how do we as a council make collective decision-making? Like this came up in the last LUT session around, what happens when we all don't agree? Like how do we behave in those circumstances where you want to show dissent, but also there's an agency position? So that was another topic that I wanted to dive a little deeper into as well. So those are three things on my mind for council retreats. But yeah, anything else that we're missing?
I would say also how we get assigned or elect to represent the agency at various bodies and in various meetings. You know, sometimes it makes sense because of a district or because of a position. But I will say, I think we should be more intentional about how we deploy ourselves.
Is it like a volume of positions or just how we select?
I think how we select, I'll use an example. And I don't know all of the details about how this happened, but yesterday, the Oregon Zoo had the incredible opportunity to celebrate their work with the lamprey. And they were actually doing some work, bringing tribes to the zoo and then down valley to, I think, let the lamprey go back to the river. And Counselor Gonzalez was our representative as part of that. I don't know how he was picked. I'm glad he was able to go. But then I got a very late ask if I would go, not via the zoo, not via Metro, but based on an outside position I have and our relationship with CRIPFIC. CRIPFIC sent that organization saying, do you want to come join us as our guest? And it felt very awkward to be invited by an outside thing to something I had not gotten an inside invitation to.
Yeah, okay.
That's just one example, I think, of thinking through how we might all strategically align to different projects differently.
Yeah, that seems like a valuable CAPD conversation, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And council staff, because they get a million invitations and
Right.
how they choose who goes, which ones we say yes to, which ones we say no
Yeah.
to.
Okay. Duly noted. Any other?
I concur.
Okay.
I just want to say quickly, I'm really looking forward to that code of conduct conversation. Not just for the moment we're in now, but it's really something to hold ourselves and future councils accountable. And also put in some restorative practices because we still have to work for the people here in this region. So really, really looking forward to that part of the conversation.
Great, thank you, Counselor Simpson. Okay, well, thanks for all the feedback. We'll be taking that back to the retreat planning group. I think our retreat agenda keeps growing, but it's probably not a bad thing.
I've found them really valuable, so thank you for continuing to make time to plan them, and I think having facilitated conversation where you're not responsible for balancing, but somebody else is great.
Thanks. All right, well, we have 10 minutes to 10:30. Should we take a short recess? No, it's like time certain, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, we
okay.
don't want to get sideways with this one.
Yeah.
Either you could tap dance, we could tell jokes, or we could take a recess.
I err on the side of recess, President Wong.
Can we have Glenn Hamburg come up and tell jokes?
Oh, Glenn, where's Glenn?
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Okay, we'll take a 10-minute recess. We're back at 10:30, time certain. Thank you. Well, we will move on to our presentations for the day. We have item 6.1, presentation of the fiscal year 26-27 proposed budget and budget message. Our first presentation this morning is officially the beginning of our budget setting season for Metro Council. As you all know, Metro staff started their budget shortly after the adoption of our last budget. Today's proposed budget is a culmination of that process. To introduce the budget and share the budget message, I would like to welcome COO Madrigal in her capacity as Metro's budget officer, along with Metro Auditor Brian Evans and Chief Financial Officer and award-winning Financial Officer Brian Kennedy.
Thank you so much, Acting Council President Wong. It's wonderful to be here. Good morning, Council. We are going to just jump right into the presentation.
Oh, sorry, 1 second. Am I supposed to gavel in as the Budget Committee? Okay, well, before we jump into the presentation, Council, we will now gavel in as.
Can we confer for 1 quick second?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, budget message first, yeah. Sorry.
Budget message first.
Budget message first, then gavel in.
Okay, well, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Do we have the presentation live? Okay, wonderful, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, here's just a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. We'll go through the budget process, deliver the budget message, talk about the budget environment and significant changes to the budget. As you know, the Metro Auditor is independently elected and so independently submits his budget to you for consideration. So you'll be hearing a presentation from him. And then we'll close out by talking about next steps in the budget and end with a public hearing. Next slide, please. The proposed budget here before you today is the result of 5 months of hard work and difficult conversations with directors, our finance team, the executive team, and integrating all the conversations that we've had with council over the last year about priorities and policy direction. While we are presenting the proposed budget to you for the first time today, there are a number of steps between this proposal and adoption. The proposed budget will return to council on April 30th for approval, and the approved budget will go before the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission, the TSCC, on May 28th, before returning to council for a final time on June 18th for adoption. Throughout this timeframe, council will have budget work sessions for deliberation and hold public hearings, and then the adopted budget will take effect on July 1st, 2026. Next slide, please. This year's financial outlook continues to be uneven. Some parts of the organization are operating from a position of stability, while others are feeling the effects of broader economic conditions. The regional economy is experiencing a slowdown, and this is showing up most clearly in 2 areas: the convention and events market at the Oregon Convention Center and a sustained downward trend in solid waste tonnage. Lower tonnage has created considerable volatility, adding pressure to transfer station fees and requiring difficult adjustments. As a result, the proposed budget includes reductions within the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Department, affecting staffing levels, services, and the hours of operation at our transfer stations. As council reviews the budget this spring, they may consider options to restore services. However, any such additions would require corresponding fee increases to maintain financial balance. Other parts of the organization are on firmer footing. Parks and Nature, having fully executed its fiscal year 25-26 reductions, is positioned to end the year with healthier reserves and more efficient operations. The Housing Department continues to be sustained by voter-approved supportive housing services resources, which provide stability through 2030, along with general fund support that helps guide the housing bond program through its ramp-down phase. Planning, research, and development also avoided the most severe federal funding impacts that were anticipated earlier in the year. Metro's financial structure remains multifaceted. Our services are supported by a variety of revenue types, many tied to voter direction, statutory requirements, or fee-for-service models. leaving relatively limited discretionary resources available to respond to shifting conditions. Rising fixed costs, including PERS obligations, inflation in materials and services, and competitive workforce pressures continue to influence the budget decisions across the agency. Next slide, please. Within this context, the proposed budget focuses on maintaining core services, supporting strategic priorities, and positioning the organization for long-term health. Major proposals in this budget include continuing agency-wide cost management measures, including a hiring chill in central services and previously implemented reductions across several departments. Investing in essential modernization efforts such as cybersecurity improvements, software licensing, and the replacement of the agency's enterprise resource planning system. Dedicating $1.5 million in ongoing general fund resources to support debt service for the Expo Sports future Buildings D and E flooring and equipment upgrades that reflects the council's direction to look for a way to fund the full upgrades. Dedicating $500,000 in general fund resources to support implementation of Expo Future's historic significance and memorialization committee recommendations and ongoing engagement. Establishing a $2 million stabilization reserve for the Oregon Convention Center to help offset economic fluctuations in the convention and events industry. And setting aside $3 million to allow council to consider a loan to Prosper Portland to support the creation of a food cart hub and beer hall across from the Oregon Convention Center. If approved, national and international visitors to the Portland region will be steps away from a sampling of Portland's world-renowned food and beverage scene, something that is not accessible to us now and would greatly increase our marketability as well as visitors to our neighborhood and, of course, our lunch options in this building. Although it's not a reason to do it alone. In shaping this proposal, I relied on the strategic targets adopted by the Metro Council, your stated values and priorities, input from department leaders and their teams, the budget equity tool, and a detailed understanding of operational risks and opportunities across Metro. These considerations, along with your ongoing commitment to racial equity and prosperity, help ensure that our investments support strong communities, a healthy environment, and a broad economic opportunity, particularly for people in places that have been historically underserved. The strategic targets, housing, economy, and environment, remain the foundation for how we prioritize resources. Those priorities are directly reflected in the construction excise tax-funded programs proposed in the budget, such as the Housing Production Acceleration Fund, the Regional Land Bank, and the Jobs Ready Lands Program. Each of these programs advances the Council's commitment to accelerating housing production, supporting job creation, and protecting environmental assets across the region. Next slide, please. I want to state again, as I did last year, that diversity and equity and inclusion work are lawful activities. It continues to be, racial equity continues to be a driving value at our organization. I want to take a moment to thank council, staff, members of CORE, and our racial equity leaders across the organization for engaging in months of retreats to consider a new approach to racial equity at Metro through targeted universalism. As council considers the recommendation from those groups, I think we have an opportunity to also re-examine how we apply that framework to the budget going forward, setting goals, performance measures, and I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. This year, there's also an investment of $60,000 for work with our DEI department to update the Construction Career Pathways Regional Workforce Equity Agreement, which is due to expire in the spring of 2027. That is it for me from now. I'm now going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Brian Kennedy, to take us through the next few slides.
Thank you, Marisa. Again, Brian Kennedy, use he, him pronouns, Chief Financial Officer here at Metro. Thank you, Acting Council President, Metro Councilors, for the chance to talk to you about the proposed budget. So I'd like to start talking about the budget environment, the context in which we're doing this work. Thinking about headwinds, the things that are holding us back. Economic uncertainty has been a theme for the last 5 years. I think, this would have been a theme if we were presenting this a month ago, but it's even more so today. The economic uncertainty relating from both conditions in our country and the war in Iran present potential significant impacts on everything that's happening in the economy, but the metro work in particular. Similarly, inflation and interest rates. This is something, if we were having this conversation 4 or 5 months ago, I think probably what I would have told you is we're expecting inflation not to drop substantially, but moderate and probably see a slow decrease in interest rates through Federal Reserve action. Today, I don't think I'd say that. I think it's likely that we will see inflation start to tick back up. And I think it's probably unlikely that we see many, if any, Federal Reserve, federal funds rate cuts through the rest of this calendar year. And then again, travel and tourism has been challenged really since the administration changed, particularly with international visitors. But when you see increases in fuel prices and the effect on airline travel, that's just another thing kind of working against what we do at the convention center, and it's going to make our work more complicated. The tailwinds haven't changed since last year. We still have strong support from the voters that allows us to do important work throughout the region. And then we have made a series of smart decisions and challenging decisions that have protected Metro's financial stability. We made a lot of hard cuts last year that both have made us more resilient and also positioned us pretty well to weather some of these challenges. So I think that is something working in our favor, in that we will have the ability to respond to these challenges as they come up. Next slide, please. So some of the significant changes in the budget, Marisa mentioned, we do see reductions in our solid waste services as a result of trying to manage some of those future fee increases. We also have new investments in cybersecurity and then implementation of our enterprise resource planning system, which is replacing our key financial and human resources systems. The zoo bond implementation really starts to ramp up in next fiscal year's budget. And then, as Marisa mentioned, we have a variety of general fund investments in our visitor venues. Next slide, please. I wanted to spend a minute just talking about transient lodging taxes. This is a chart you've seen before. The dark blue line is actual transient lodging tax collections at the convention center. The orange line is our forecast that we use. And then the dotted red line is the percentage change. And a couple things to point out. So on the peak on that blue line is fiscal year 2019, which is our peak year for transient lodging tax collections. And really since the pandemic, we have been looking to that as where we're trying to get back to. But when you look at the percentage change, so from 2014 to 2019, that was a period of really dramatic and unprecedented growth in transient lodging taxes in the region. And one of the things that, I'm not trying to be a total doomer here, but I'm not sure that our guideposts should necessarily be getting back to that 2019 peak. When you look at we had some pretty dramatic growth coming out of the pandemic, but we've flattened out and we've actually seen year-over-year decreases in transient lodging tax. Small decreases, but we're not growing. And our projection for the future is growing at about 3% a year. So, and this is important because those transient lodging taxes that come into the convention center are really an important buffer. So in years when convention business isn't as high as we'd like it to be, it provides a stable operating base. In years where the convention is really busy and generating a lot of net revenue, that transient lodging tax helps fund important capital investments. And the takeaway from this slide is we're not going to grow our way out of that without new investments and without something dramatic changing. And part of the challenge is, to some extent, some of those changes are going to need to be external to Metro. We have resources. I think we have some smart investments programmed in the budget, but this is going to be a complicated problem that we're going to be facing for the next several years. Next slide, please. I like to show our financial reserves and where we're at both on an operating and capital basis. There are a couple changes this year. The convention center, their operating reserve last year was green. We moved it to yellow this year, reflecting the financial challenges we have. We're drawing down that operating reserve based on the lower level of activity, and we expect that to be challenged over the next couple years. The other significant change is WPES. Their operating reserve last year was also green. We moved that to yellow. We are still above our policy required 45-day reserve, but that margin is a lot closer than it used to be. And with challenges we've seen around tonnage in the region, we're more at risk there. So the takeaway here is, there are definitely some bright spots. The zoo, Parks and Nature, our general fund, those operating reserves are in good shape, but we need to monitor our other departments and venues pretty closely. And we know we have capital challenges at the Expo Center and Portland 5. That's not a new problem, but something we need to keep an eye on. Next slide, please. So in terms of some of the changes to the budget, overall, in terms of staffing, there's a net reduction of 17.5 FTE. There are a handful of additions. One thing to note here on central services, we're really only talking about one new FTE, which is a position supporting our cybersecurity work, which is more important than ever. But we also have a couple positions moving from our external services departments into central services to more efficiently operate. So we're not actually adding 3 new FTE in central services. And then very modest changes in planning and visitor venues. Overall, we are seeing a contraction of the agency's staffing, but also showing in total in the current fiscal year, we're at 1,136 FTE. Next year's proposed budget is just over 1,100 FTE. So again, that net reduction of 17.5, primarily coming from reductions in WPES. Next slide, please. Looking at the budget in total, current fiscal year's budget is just under 1.9 billion. Next year's budget is 1.63 billion. That's a decrease of about 12%. That probably seems like a big number, but again, the couple important things to note is a lot of that reduction is planned spend down of bond proceeds, housing bond proceeds, zoo bond proceeds, Parks and Nature bond proceeds. And then also we had a significant reduction in the Supportive Housing Services Fund, which is a reflection of the counties spending down some of those fund balances that they had accumulated in the early years of the Supportive Housing Services Program. There are other decreases in the budget. The general fund is down, MERC fund is down, solid waste fund is down, but those are much smaller decreases in the budget. Again, that significant decrease is due to that planned spending of bond proceeds that we have budgeted. In terms of FTE, it's about a 1% decrease overall. So our budget is smaller. But again, that is primarily a reflection of some of those larger changes. We are seeing some changes in our operating funds as well. Next slide, please. A different view of the budget. So the pie chart on the left is showing current expenditures. That is money that we expect to spend this year or that we have budgeted to spend this year. You'll notice that of that pie chart, the biggest chunk of the pie is materials and services, over 787 million. That is major contracts at our solid waste facilities, food and beverage, at our visitor venues, but then also payments to local government partners through Supportive Housing Services, local share through Parks and Nature, payments for the Affordable Housing Bond. So the bulk of Metro's resources are going out to other partners to deliver services, not delivered by Metro itself. You see the total budget by department on the right. Housing, again, is the largest chunk at about 33%, which is kind of remarkable because if you were looking at a chart for this from 10 years ago, housing wouldn't show up at all. And in that time, it has come to become one of the biggest things we do. And again, the total budget, just over 1.6 billion. Next slide, please. This is a slightly different view. So the budget on the right is the same, showing the budget by department, but on the left, we're showing total budget by category. So that includes everything in the budget, not just the resources that we expect to expend in the current fiscal year. And the main difference here is you can see that we have significant contingencies and reserves built into the budget, over $368 million. And again, a lot of that is bond proceeds, affordable housing bond, Parks Bond, Zoo Bond, supportive housing services reserves, not only ours, but what the counties hold, and then our operating reserves from the general fund, the solid waste fund, MERC fund. There's a lot that Metro does. While our budget is large, in terms of money that actually moves out the door, it is a smaller share of that 1.6 billion. Next slide, please. I like to show this chart, our 10-year expenditure history. What's interesting here is it really shows the impact of some of those voter-approved programs on Metro. So the dark blue lines are current expenditures. The kind of salmon-colored bar is our interfund transfers, and then the line is our ending fund balance. And then on the final two bars, we have green, which is our contingency. And what you see here is, relatively stable expenditure pattern until you get into 21-22, which is supportive housing services. It's really hard to understate how much the start of that program changed Metro's finances very dramatically. You'll notice when you look at the ending fund balance line that it stays relatively high and then drops precipitously in the last 2 years. And that's just a reflection that we are budgeting so that we can expend those resources, because again, most of those contingencies and reserves are tied to our bond programs. We will spend that money someday, just not necessarily today. So we budget so that we have it available for expenditure. But when you look at that line, you see that ending fund balance doesn't change that much year to year. So we don't expect to see very dramatic declines, but just a reflection that we have a lot of programs going on, and it's not always easy to anticipate exactly when an affordable housing project will move forward or a parks land acquisition will be ready. Next slide, please. This is a 10-year look at our agency FTE history. You can see the kind of retraction in the last couple of years. We hit our peak in 24-25, and then we have reductions both last year or in the current fiscal year and then proposed for next fiscal year. But overall, we haven't seen dramatic changes in our FTE. This is an interesting contrast to the expenditure history, because supportive housing services obviously drove significant change in the financial resources running through Metro, but haven't dramatically changed the staffing that we have. Next slide, please. This chart shows our debt service obligations. The main takeaway here is that over time, the amount of outstanding debt Metro has is projected to go down. So we are repaying that debt according to those debt schedules. And it's a not insignificant number, but I think kind of rather than focusing on the amount of outstanding debt, it's really thinking about the ways in which the Metro has been able to leverage our large tax base to deliver important investments across the region, and that the cost of those investments goes down over time. Next slide, please. My last piece here is a reminder that as we go through the budget process, the budget adoption is it's more than just one thing. One thing the council does is approve the appropriation authority, but the council also takes very important steps related to our property taxes. And there are actually three pieces there. One is approving our permanent rate, which is 9.66 cents per thousand. The second piece is approving the local option levy rate, which is 9.6 cents per thousand of assessed value. And then the final piece is approving the debt service levy, so paying the debt service on those outstanding bonds. We estimate that to be about 39 cents per thousand of assessed value. The important thing to note is for the debt service levy, the council isn't actually approving the specific dollar amount levy, but rather approving the amount of debt service, and that is near the top of the chart. So it's about 92 million for all those programs: Zoo Bond, Parks and Nature Bond, previous Parks and Nature bond and the affordable housing bond. So we estimate the cents per thousand, but that's not how it actually is levied by the counties. So with that, my presentation is concluded, and I will hand it over to Auditor Evans.
Great, thanks, Brian. Good morning, Acting Council President Huang, Metro Councilors. Thanks again for the opportunity. I'm Brian Evans. I'm the elected Metro Auditor. Reminder why my budget is presented separately is this is to comply with the provisions in code that create some separation and independence for my office, since we do evaluate the management team and want to make sure our budget is presented directly to you. Next slide, please. So just a quick reminder about our office's mission. We're here to make sure Metro is accountable to the public, to make sure Metro's activities are transparent, and really to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and equity of Metro's programs and services that are delivered to the public. We do that by conducting what are called performance audits. Those are a little bit more comprehensive than what are financial audits, in that we look at what Metro's goals are, look at the operations, and see if there's ways that the operations can get to those goals more efficiently, effectively, or equitably. We also manage a hotline where members of the public or employees can report anonymously if they have concerns, and we route those to the appropriate entity for investigation. And then we also manage the contract for the financial audit that's required by the state for every fiscal year. Next slide, please. So just a quick note about some accomplishments this fiscal year. Before I launch into the budget, we've completed 4 performance audits so far. We've managed 23 reports to the Accountability Hotline. I want to give a big thanks to HR for their assistance on those reports that come into the hotline that are related to personnel issues. We don't investigate those ourselves, but really appreciate the dedicated investigation team in HR to look into those and make sure they're addressed appropriately. Next slide, please. This is just a quick reminder of the audits we've completed so far. So we looked at transparent governance almost at the beginning of this fiscal year. We finished that audit. We've done 2 dedicated audits related to accountability hotline cases that have come in. And then we did a follow-up, a pretty comprehensive follow-up of supportive housing services. And that's our 3rd audit of that program since it was initiated. Next slide, please. So looking forward, this slide has been unchanged, I think, every time I've presented my budget. We are all people doing this work, so that's why 93% of our budget is for personnel, and then we have a small, less than 10% that are for materials and services. Next slide, please. Here's the actual numbers. So relatively consistent at just over 1 million per year in the last, the actual amount that we've expended, the amount that was adopted last year, and then the amount we're proposing. So it's, again, mostly changes to personnel that are related to cost of living increases and merit increases, and then a relatively small amount that's been mostly unchanged for materials and services. Next slide, please. So looking forward, we have 5 audits that are underway. 3 of those you will be presented with before the end of the fiscal year. We're looking to publish our Oregon Zoo bond implementation audit later this month and present that at the end of this month to you all. We have a follow-up on our transfer station operating controls audit that's being reviewed by management right now, and we'll plan to publish that in May. We are also nearing completion of our every other year audit of Metro's financial conditions for the last 10 fiscal years. I anticipate that'll come to you and be published in May. And then we have 2 audits at the bottom of the list that are just at the beginning phases. I'll look at communications, and then I'll look at accessibility. Those will not be completed this fiscal year, but should be completed by the end of the calendar year, I would anticipate. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess that's it. Happy to answer any questions you may have about my budget. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to the management team.
Oh, we still had a couple of slides left. We're going to wrap up with next steps in the budget process when that comes back up. Here we go. So we have 4 public hearings coming up. There, after today, there's one today, then again on April 30th, and then May 5th, 14th, and then public hearing with the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission on 28th. Next slide, please. For council, if you desire to make amendments to the budget, we ask that we get those amendments in by May 21st, so both amendments and budget notes. And then on June 4th, council will have the opportunity to consider those prior to adopting the budget on the 18th. Next slide. So some of the key milestones, so budget approval, so on April 30th, that is where you set those property tax rates, permanent rate, local option levy rate, debt service levy, and then also approve the budget for transmittal to the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. Again, we have that hearing on the 28th, and then budget adoption is on the 18th, where we're setting appropriations and then imposing those taxes. Next slide, please. I believe that's everything. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you to the, okay. Well, council, we will now gavel in as the budget committee. Georgia, will you please read the accompanying resolution number 26-5586 into the record by title only?
Resolution number 26-5586 for the purpose of approving the fiscal year 2026-27 budget, setting property tax levies and transmitting the approved budget to the Multnomah County Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission.
Okay, great, thank you so much. And now we can take questions or comments. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question for Brian. When is the last time, or have we changed the ad valorem tax rate? It seems like it's, every year it's pretty much, it's the same, or at least it has been while I've been here. Have we changed it in the past?
Councilor Rosenthal, no. Generally, the permanent property tax rate is unchanged. There are a few jurisdictions around the state that may levy less than their permanent rate, but that's pretty uncommon. And typically, local option levy rates, given that they're approved by the voters, most jurisdictions levy the full rate amount authorized by voters.
And we do the same.
Okay, any other questions? Councilor Lewis.
Yes, Auditor Evans, is the presentation today your version of a budget message? Will we see you again in our regular budgeting workshops?
Thanks for the question, Councilor Lewis. I'm not sure about the budget message portion of that question. I'm happy to come back and be in front of you for a work session if you'd like to see that. I have not done that in the past, but always happy to share more about our work if you would like to schedule a work session.
No, I was just trying to orient myself if we were getting granular into your budget today, and the answer sounds like yes, if we would like to.
Typically, this is the opportunity, but I'm happy if you want to get granular. I'm here for whatever time you want.
Okay, great, thank you.
Brian, it seems like we did a lot of effective budgeting, cost cutting, efficiencies last year. Can you maybe speak more about the impacts of that, like what we're seeing now as a result, just so I can better understand that, and then also if there's any, additional efficiencies that could be squeezed out this year, and what's your take on that?
Acting Council President Wong, that's a great question. I think some of the most tangible examples, so some of the most challenging cuts last year were in Parks and Nature, for example, and the operating reserve for Parks and Nature is in a much more stable position than it was before. So those cuts that we made, I think we knew they're necessary, but it's really proven out that we have put that program back on the operating portion of Parks and Nature on a stable financial trajectory. In terms of the visitor venues, we also had significant reductions there. The challenge is we're still seeing a lot of the economic factors that are challenging those operations. And if we hadn't made those reductions, we would be in a even more challenging position going into next year. So it's not that, we've solve the problem when it comes to visitor venues, but I think at least we have some space in which to operate and make some plans, which is part of the reason the COO's recommended budget or proposed budget has stabilization reserve for the convention center, and we're trying to make some of these strategic investments. I think in terms of operating efficiencies, one of the main areas we're looking at is those investments in information technology, particularly our finance and human resources related systems. We're not going to see those efficiencies show up necessarily in next fiscal year, but I think that year after, because we will be implementing that system as of July 1st, 2027. And that's an area where we're going to be able to replace a lot of manual processes and move towards more automation, more efficiency, and better results for the agency.
And in a recent meeting with our WPES team, I think they were doing, was it zero-based budgeting? What does that mean? And like, is that like a pilot? Like, is the whole agency going to go to that methodology? Like, what's going on with that?
That was an approach WPES did. From my perspective, there are a lot of different tools you can use to get to look at your budget and assess the effectiveness and kind of efficiency of what you're achieving. Zero-based budgeting is one tool. I think it worked for them. It was a good opportunity to really think about the programs and services they offered, and not just kind of build on future years. I think, or on past years going into the future. From the central services perspective, last year we went through a pretty significant reduction exercise that forced departments to look at what those operating activities were and make reductions. And I think that's also a very valid way to approach kind of thinking strategically about your budget. So, we're not planning on implementing a zero-based budgeting approach overall, but I think across the agency, we've had, every department has had to have some kind of pretty kind of serious explorations of their budget. For the venues, they went through that in the pandemic. I mean, they for all intents and purposes, went to a zero budget and had to rebuild from there. So we've taken a lot of different approaches in how we've thought about kind of having an effective budget that really meets the moment.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go with Councilor Simpson.
Thank you, President Wong. Thank you so much for your presentation, COO Metrico. Brian, thank you again for your astuteness and your not cost cutting, but your responsible budgeting through this process. I really appreciate that. One of the things you said and you spoke out loud about were really things outside of our control, i.e. A federal regime that is unstable and weak at the top, which means it'll impact us here locally in a lot of ways. Do you see us particularly being impacted in real time, event or situation by situation via the budget? Because we did talk a bit about the impacts of tourism and travel, particularly internationally, but also here within the CONUS or the continental United States, like people moving between and visiting us. Like, do you see those impacts being lasting and impacting our budget in real time, let's say month to month or situation by situation?
Councillor Simpson, that's a great question. I think it's a little bit hard to tell. And we have the ability to learn from past experiences. One of the things we saw, particularly around travel and tourism coming out of the Great Recession, is for convention businesses booked far out in advance, not as far as it used to be, but in a lot of cases, those events still happen despite some of these disruptions. But as airline costs go up, other costs go up, businesses retract, fewer people come to those events. So, our food and beverage margin on a conference, is maybe smaller than it would have been if you had a stronger economy. And so you don't necessarily see the dramatic drop-off in activity that we saw during COVID, but it's kind of a gradual degradation and maybe slower booking in the future as people are trying to be more conservative about managing travel costs for their organizations. So I guess I don't expect to see kind of dramatic impacts on a month-to-month basis, but it's something that we're going to need to manage. In a lot of ways, we're fortunate in that we're not uniquely exposed to some of those economic indicators. We're going to see our partners at the cities and the counties are going to experience a lot of this economic pain in the same way that we do. And so, you're going to see governments around the region, around the state, having to react to some of these economic challenges.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, it really feels like they're, particularly the things outside of our wheelhouse and control, are very unstable. And it's from moment to moment, it feels like either pushing a boulder up a very, very steep hill or just swimming against the great tide. Either way, like it just feels very, very hard at the local level. And it puts us in a precarious situation, particularly with our constituents, as we talk about affordability, as we talk about bringing folks in and, talk about increasing jobs and growth. That can be a little challenging considering all of those factors at the top.
Council President.
Please.
If I could, I think, Brian and I have been talking a lot just about the unknown unknowns and then, some of the trends out there. What happens if fuel costs continue to spike? What happens if, that starts to ripple through the economy? And I think, Councilor Simpson, I think you've identified, pretty well there's the things that we can control and the things that we can't. And I think our commitment to you and to the public is that the decisions that are within our control are careful decisions, are transparent decisions, are, made keeping in mind that we need to maintain a base of stability in our reserves, in our organization, before we make additional investments. I think the opportunities that we have to sort of improve our lot at Expo, across the street from the convention center, those are strategic investments. If we do nothing, we know what to expect. We can expect that 3% increase, hopefully, in the transient lodging tax. But if we want to do more than that, if we want to change the environment, I think that there are opportunities for action. So we've really tried to balance being fiscal stewards of public dollars, providing value to the public, trying to rebuild trust by having strong operations, really examining every penny, and at the same time, investing in Greater Portland, and the investments that you directed and requested, through the CET, are just another example of that's a lever that we have that other organizations don't, and because we can't cut our way out of everything. Some cuts are necessary, but we also have to figure out how to invest. So you have our commitment that as we're monitoring the economic conditions, if we're starting to see things that are looking scary, we will come back. I do want to commend Marta and her team at WPES. They started their zero-based budgeting process before the depths of the tonnage decline or slide were known, and that really positioned them well to be able to put additional options on the table to stabilize that department in a very short period of time. So kudos to that team and to the budget team for supporting that process.
Thank you so much, COO Madrigal. I really appreciate that. Thank you for laying that out for the public. I think it's super important that everyone knows that we're doing everything that we can internally, but also like there are things beyond our control, but we're also monitoring them and responding to them as they arise. So I'm grateful and thankful for your dedication and service to this process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I really see let's not just spend money, but let's make investments. Kind of mentality in this budget. So thank you. All right, let's move on to Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Interim Chair. Quick question. This has to do with P5. My understanding is when we decided to give notice to the city that we were going to opt out of our P5, I think it was 18 months, but that doesn't quite coincide with the budget cycle. So I just want to get clear that that would be 18 months from December would be like August. No? Or I'm
It
just
would
a
be
little unclear about the
effective,
timing.
be effective June 30th of 2027. So it does
Oh,
line,
so it
does
does
in fact line
coincide.
up with the budget.
Okay, it does coincide. Is there any chance, the question is there any chance that actions by the city could accelerate that process and change and require budget amendments in the interim, or are we pretty much fixed with that situation?
Our expectation is that if there are adjustments, they're most likely to extend the process rather than shorten it. So our assumption is that P5 will be in Metro's budget through all of next fiscal year. And that if there are adjustments that need to happen, that we'll deal with them in mid-year next fiscal year.
Okay, so it's more likely we'll be having a discussion about this again next year rather than we might be cutting it short. Okay, thank you.
Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. Brian, I'd like to thank you for the work that you put into not only preparing the budget, but putting it in context. We have a lot of things that are rapidly changing in a way that I feel good, like I can almost sleep at night, because I know you're up worrying for us. In terms of, COO Madrigal brought up fuel and the knock-on effects. I'd be curious if we could actually learn just from this past month, particularly around how parks and WPEZ maybe have dealt with the increase in price. Because I do think that while we have parts of our agency that see the rise in fuel costs, signaling the climate impacts fuel has is positive. We spend a significant amount of our resource in WPEZ driving trash around, and we spend a significant amount of our resource in parks driving our people around to places unreachable by foot or by bus. So I'm not asking for an answer here. I just think it might be a good continuous improvement process for us to kind of do a quick moment in time. How have we managed? What should we be prepared for?
That's a great question. I think, one thing I would point out is we've made, kind of at council's direction and with support, significant investments in electrifying our fleet. So at least around our internal operations, some of that impact is muted. The place where we definitely have the biggest exposure is the transport contract for waste out to Arlington. We were actually just looking at those numbers this morning. The price we're paying is up more than $1 per gallon over a year ago. And the good news is right now our fuel costs are still coming in under budget. Just as a matter of conservatism, we tend to pad that budget knowing that fuel prices fluctuate over time. So our assessment right now is that things look okay, but we're going to have to monitor that over time and see if we have enough space in the budget if prices stay elevated or increase even more, we may need to be back to council for a budget amendment to deal with that.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question? Please. Auditor Evans, since your budget kind of operates separate from the rest, I do want to take a moment to appreciate that 93% of your expenses are on people. We are one of very few auditing agencies because many of our peers are too small to have internal auditors and contract out for audit work. What kind of comparator work do you do to set the salaries? Are we competing with private market, or you just look at auditing shops, say at Multnomah County, State of Oregon, Washington County?
Thanks for the question, Councilor Lewis. I benchmark to Multnomah County and the City of Portland Auditor's Office. They both have elected audit functions. They're bigger than our office, but roughly the same, obviously geographic location where the work is physically done, and have a similar approach to performance auditing in terms of the history and their alignment with government and auditing standards. their kind of orientation towards public topics and taking on things that maybe are more complex, but think are valuable for the public to look. So I typically do that every other year, to be frank, and I will say that we're often trailing the changes that they have in their salary escalation. So if anything, I should probably do that more frequently to make sure that we're not getting too out of sync with where the industry is going in terms of our peers who may want to work for us in the future.
And can I ask where you benchmark your non-auditor professional support staff salary?
Non-auditor professionals, so my administrative assistant? That's internally benchmarked. We go through we have in the past gone through the work of comparable character studies that Metro does to comply with pay equity law at the state of Oregon. We've definitely had some back and forth with management in terms of where those comparatives should be, but it's currently benchmarked towards the other classifications that are in the administrative assistant classifications.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, seeing no further questions or comments, colleagues, we have multiple opportunities coming up to discuss the budget. Just a note on council created budget notes and amendments. Your staff have the forms if they would like to go that route, but just a reminder, this is a very tough budget season. So I would recommend and ask that if you have amendments or notes that they're well thought out and,
Saving money, not spending money?
Sure, if you want to put it that way, that sounds great. Just be sure to have those out by, was it May 21st, so that we can properly consider them. Okay, and with that, we'll move on to a public hearing on the proposed budget and resolution number 26-5586. We'll open the public hearing on this proposed budget. Georgia, will you please describe to the audience our procedures for the public hearing? And thank you to our auditor and to Brian.
If you are testifying on resolution number 26-5586, now is the time to do so. If you are testifying in person, please sign up by filling out a blue card in the back of the room and bringing it up to me. If you are testifying on Zoom or by phone, please sign up by using the raise hand function in the reactions or more menus, or by dialing *9. When it is your turn to testify, I'll call on your name or phone number. For those on Zoom, click accept to be promoted to a panelist. Your Zoom window will close briefly before you rejoin as a panelist, and you can turn on your camera if you'd like. Testimony is limited to 3 minutes, and the timer begins when you begin speaking. If you are testifying in person, their timer is located on your testimony table, on the wall, and on the digital screen. Please state your name for the record before testifying. You do not need to give your physical address. And Acting Council President Wong, I have not received any testimony requests in advance. I'm not seeing any blue cards or folks coming up in the audience, and no hands raised virtually.
Okay. Well, seeing no further discussion, we'll close this public hearing. Metro Council will hold additional public hearings on the budget prior to adoption. And as the budget committee, we'll consider approving the fiscal year 26-27 budget on Thursday, April 30th, 2026. The approved budget will then be sent to the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission for review. The TSCC hearing on Metro's budget is scheduled for May 28th, 2026 at 11 a.m. No further action on the budget will be taken at this meeting. The budget committee, will meet next on Tuesday, April 14th, 2026. All right, we'll move on to item 6.2, Supportive Housing Services County Fiscal Year 2026 Q2 Reports. Our next presentation is a review of the latest quarterly reports from our 3 counties that partner with Metro to deliver services funded by the Supportive Housing Services tax. These reports cover the Q2 of the current fiscal year, and I'm pleased to welcome staff from Clackamas, Multnomah. The first time our county partners have presented their quarterly reports directly, and we're especially grateful that they've made time to join us today during this busy budget season. I also want to thank county staff for their financial expertise and their knowledge of the services being delivered in their communities. And just as with Metro staff, I want to note that policy direction comes from their elected boards. So I don't expect our presenters here to be able to answer every policy question council might have to that or have today. With that, we have our whole team up, including Yesenia Delgado, Metro's Supportive Housing Services Director Division, to kick us off and introduce our staff and county partners. And I also understand Multnomah County's new director, Director Vergara, is here. Welcome to Portland and our region. And with that, I'll turn it over to staff. Yesenia.
Thank you. Good morning, Metro Councilors and Acting President Wong. For the record, my name is Yesenia Delgado. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the SHS Division Director. As you all might recall, usually RJ Stanglin, who's the Finance Manager, and I provide these Q2 updates, but as Acting President Wong mentioned, today I am joined by our county partners, who I'm really looking forward to sharing space with all today to talk a little bit more about Q2 reports and discuss some regional highlights with you all. As you all might recall, the Supportive Housing Services Work Plan adopted by Metro Council in 2020 provides goals and regional outcomes for the 10-year measure that we have. There are also local implementation plans that provide a 10-year framework for how funds will be spent in the counties. Counties then submit what we call an annual work plan every year that set quantitative and qualitative goals that are in alignment with SHS requirements and the goals and commitments set forth in, like I described, the Metro SHS work plan, but also local implementation plans. We then have quarterly reports that get submitted every quarter that provide an update on progress towards these goals that we've set forth as a region. And today we'll be talking about the Q2 reports, which are a pivotal point in the year to understand kind of where we're at with the progress we've made and understand where we're headed to like finalize the year. Our county partners usually provide this presentation to what was formerly the SHS Oversight Committee, who conducted oversight and accountability on behalf of Metro Council. But given that they have been sunsetted and with the Regional Policy Oversight Committee not launched officially right now until next week, which is when their first meeting, the 4 jurisdictions collectively decided that it would be best to all come here and present to you all collectively. That way you all can hear a little bit more from our implementing partners in terms of highlights, opportunities, some challenges that they're experiencing in their counties as they work to regionalize this measure. I am joined by RJ Stanglin, who's our finance manager, and then Lauren Decker, who's representing Clackamas County, Jess Larson from Washington County, Anna Plum and Kanoy Eggleston from Multnomah County, and they'll further introduce themselves as we go along the presentation. And I'll just note that we had a bit of a timing hiccup, and I know that some staff here will need to leave around 12:30, so if that happens, I just wanted to make sure that you all were aware of that. So again, thank you so much to our county partners for being here. I'm going to walk us through some few just kind of regional ground setting slides, and then I will pass it over to them. If you go to the next slide, as I said, we're going to be walking through some Q2 regional progress, which provides a snapshot and more real in-time progress for where we're at with our this year's regional goals. Counties will then walk through their county-specific progress towards their goal and share some additional program highlights for their local jurisdiction, but then we'll also be talking about some of the regional work and highlights that we're doing to regionalize SHS across Metro. RJ will then walk us through some high-level regional financial updates for you all to review and assess the financial health of the measure and where we're doing this year, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. Next slide. So this slide here really provides an overview of the regional progress made towards the fiscal year 26 goals. As you'll see here, it's providing an update on the core SHS funded services that we provide. So you'll see here on the slide an overview of each program. The goals are in the middle, and then where we're at in percentage towards tracking towards that goal. In the interest of time, I won't walk through all of them, but as you all can see here, This is data as of Q2, and as a region, we are on track to meet all of our goals for this year. And as I have been talking to you all in previous council sessions, as a region, we have been really shifting from new placements or opening new things and really shifting towards maintaining stability for those that we have housed in our system. And despite that, we're still seeing a healthy amount of new placements and new people served with that. So as we are starting to see more and more programs dedicated to enhancing and promoting housing retention and stability, we are also seeing here kind of where we're at with newly serving households. So, and just as a reminder that in the annual reports is where we'll see more data around who we're retaining in services, but also households that we have sustained year over year, in addition to these households that are newly placed. Next slide. Counties are required to also report yearly on how SHS funds are spent in alignment with the Metro SHS work plan's requirement of 75% of the funds going to people that are extremely low income, have one or more disabling conditions, and are experiencing or at imminent risk of experiencing long-term or frequent episodes of homelessness, otherwise known as Population A, and that 25% of those funds go to services that are experiencing homelessness or have a substantial risk of experiencing homelessness, otherwise known as a Population B. So the 75-25 financial requirement will be assessed over the 10-year period, and counties submit yearly data to see how we're on track to meet that requirement. There are 2 touch points during the year where we receive information on Population A and B. Q2 is one of them, as you see here, which really provides an overview of the households being served and if they identify as Population A or B. And as you can see here, for this fiscal year, we have 777 households newly placed or served with prevention that are identifying as Population A, and 1,678 households that are identifying as Population B. I will just note that at this point during Q2, this is just programmatic data that hasn't been extrapolated into our financial report. That would then indicate how much is being spent on 75-25. And as a reminder, typically what we've seen in previous years is that even though we're perhaps serving less Population A households, because of the services that they need, they tend to be leveraging more resources than Population B households. So just as a reminder, we'll get more into that analysis at the county annual reports that are due October 31st for the previous year. But I'll just share that, in the regional annual report that we shared with you all last year, we saw that for fiscal year 25 as a region, in the regional report, it indicated that 65% of the funds were spent on Population A and 34% of the funds were on Population B. And this data here starts to indicate kind of where we're headed as we look to finalize the fiscal year and start running analysis on how we tracked against the 75-25 financial split. With that, I will pass it over to my county colleagues who will be unpacking a little bit more their county-specific data and their program highlights.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Decker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Housing Services Manager for Clackamas County. And I will talk about Q2 progress for Clackamas County. So on this slide, as you can see, Clackamas is on track to meet all of their quantitative goals. You'll see strong progress across key areas, including permanent housing placements, households served, and exits to stable housing. In short, we feel really good about the overall trends. One of our major Q2 developments was a new program called Housing for Success, which I'll talk about more on the next slide. This is going to be a really important step toward long-term stability for both participants and for stabilizing our system. Next slide, please. So Housing for Success, which is RIF funded, it launched in Q2. This is a 3-year voucher program that assists and stabilizes people who are moving off of regional long-term rental assistance. And it's Clackamas County's first housing with services program type. Our team spent many hours building this program intentionally. We used an equity lens tool while building this program and built in language access and accessibility. The whole point of this program is to really support those households who are transitioning off of ARLA. It's built to empower participants with employment coaching, barrier reduction, a savings program, and specialized case management. A goal of this program is to help participants find financial stability and independence. Every participant who's enrolled in this program has an individualized goal plan, and at the end of Q2, we had transitioned 35 households into this program. We expect that number to rise to 100 by the end of this fiscal year. It's still early, but we do know of some successes. We already know of one participant who's looking at building their own business and taking steps towards that, and there's another person who is seriously looking at becoming a homeowner in this program. Next slide. For our regional highlight, I want to talk about healthcare and housing integration. This is also RIF funded. And this program Health and Housing connects homelessness response with healthcare and behavioral health, which helps people stabilize and stay housed. There's quite a few areas I'd like to shine a light on in the health and housing work that's being done. First of all, it is the Health and Housing Case Conferencing, otherwise known as cross-sector case conferencing. The whole point of bringing folks together is to connect people to primary care, specialty care, behavioral health, long-term care, and insurance. And so far, Clackamas has already helped over 124 households connect to that type of care in Clackamas County through case conferencing. We're also getting ready to launch our first medical respite program later this year. This respite program is for people who are leaving the hospital or emergency room who need a safe place to recover, who, if they are not going to respite, a lot of times they're going to be expected to try to recover from a procedure in their tent or outside. So we're really excited about that work. We're also leveraging Medicaid and federal and other funding sources to help stretch SHS dollars further. And we've built a behavioral health retention team that supports people who are already in permanent supportive housing, who are at risk of eviction, get connected to supports if they're experiencing substance use disorder or behavioral health problems. Just really wanting to talk about the collaboration and the regionalization that's happening in healthcare and housing. Collaboration's excellent. Metro and the three counties meet regularly, coordinating and aligning around all of this good work that's happening. And just to note that without RIF funding, it wouldn't be possible to do this work. Next slide. Here's a snapshot of our year-to-date spending progress. Clackamas is tracking and in alignment with planned investments. Funding is moving into implementation across the system, and overall, we're feeling good about where spending is headed throughout the rest of the year. Next slide. Here's our spending by program slide. So this shows how funding is distributed across major program areas. Investments are being intentionally balanced across the system, including prevention, shelter, housing, system, access, and supportive services. And our goal continues to be creating and stabilizing a system that works from the front doors all the way to long-term stability. And we stay focused on reducing bottlenecks and keeping the system balanced. And that concludes my update for Clackamas. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kanoy Eggleston. My pronouns are she and hers. I'm the program director at Multnomah County's Homeless Services Department. I'm going to actually kick us off, talk a little bit about our annual work plan progress, talk about some highlights, and then I'm going to hand it over to our interim director, Anna Plum, who's going to talk about HMIS, Built for Zero, and then our financial spend. So Multnomah County has had steady progress towards our fiscal year 26 annual work plan goals. We have seen an increase in housing placement and are now at 42% of our annual placement goal for all of our placement types. What this means is that since the beginning of this fiscal year, we have placed 398 households. That's over 600 individuals across SHS-funded permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and other housing programs. More specifically, this slide will kind of list those out. So across SHS-funded PSH, that's 172 households that were placed, achieving 69% of our placement goal. We've placed 199 households in rapid rehousing, achieving 55.7 of the goal, of our annual goal. And then for other housing placements, there were 30 households placed in the first half of this fiscal year. That number is a little bit lower than our other goals, and that's mainly due to some updated reporting guidance we received from our Metro colleagues. In the housing department, this number, it reflects the changes in reporting guidance after the goals were set. We had to move some categories over to emergency shelter. If we had kept them, it would have been at 55%. So that's reflective of the update. And then we've made a lot of significant progress in our homeless prevention and shelter goals. In the first half of the year, we've prevented 443 households from returning back into homelessness and sustained 1,044 units of SHS-funded shelter in our local community. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to share 3 areas of program highlights: PSH expansion, support for culturally specific capacity, and then implementation of our new outreach strategy. So in the first half of this fiscal year, Multnomah County added 154 new units to our system, with opening 3 permanent supportive housing programs. This keeps us on track to meeting our LIP, or local implementation goal, of adding 2,235 new supportive housing units to our system. These projects include Julia West. It's an 89 PSH units. We partnered with Northwest Pilot Project and NARA Northwest to provide supportive services to older adults experiencing homelessness. 20 of those units are supported with culturally specific services for the Indigenous individuals navigating recovery. And then we have another project, Alder 9. There are 25 PSH units there. It's SHS funded, that supports our support services in partnership with Impact Northwest. And then lastly, we have Kafori Court. It's 40 PSH units. It's located in Portland's Northeast King neighborhood, and we partnered with the Black community of Portland and Northwest Pilot Project to provide those culturally specific support services. The second area of program highlights I wanted to talk quickly about is our continued investment in culturally specific capacity. So we dispersed grant funding to 10 new and emerging culturally specific providers. These are system development grants, and they're really intended to provide organizational stability and infrastructure, really in order to build providers' capacity to be able to provide those culturally specific services. So we're really excited about these grants. And then lastly, we have continued to implement our new outreach strategy this year. There's some key components to this outreach strategy. Geographic coverage is one of them. So we have providers that are assigned to one of the 8 defined zones across the county. This is a new model, and it's really intended to ensure consistent coverage across the entire county, decrease duplication of services. And then another element of this outreach strategy is, in addition to those geographically covered zones, we have specialized outreach teams that really focus on medical outreach and then culturally specific outreach. Another area of this outreach strategy is just enhanced coordination and data collection. So we're really improving, the data collection on when and where is outreach happening across our community. And then we use that information during weekly coordination meetings. The outreach workers share this information and really coordinate across client needs and services. And then lastly, another key component of our outreach strategy that we've worked on throughout these last 2 quarters is developing an outreach manual to really codify Multnomah County's guidance and expectations for outreach teams. We really want to ensure we have that consistent approach of service delivery when it comes to outreach. And so during the Q2 that we're reporting on, SHD outreach teams have made over 4,500 contacts with individuals, connecting them to emergency shelters, housing, and those critical services. They've also been able to newly engage 135 individuals across our community.
Thanks, Kanoy. Next slide, please. For the record, my name is Anna Plum. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the interim director for Multnomah County's Homeless Services Department. I'm going to talk a little bit about a regional highlight we'd like to make for Q2, which is our continued progress on implementing our new homelessness management information system. Multnomah County leads the HMIS implementation in partnership with the other 2 counties. It is a truly regional system. It serves all 3 of the counties, and we are the administrator, but we work very closely with the counties. As I've spoken with you about before, we are engaging on replacing our old and out-of-date HMIS system with a new, very exciting, much more functional HMIS system, but that is a major undertaking. That includes replacing a system that is used by thousands of users, hundreds of providers across 3 counties. counties, and our data collection we take very, very seriously because we know that's how we understand what we're doing in the community. So we are well on the way. In Q2, we have a dedicated IT project team led by Multnomah County, but we have systems analysts that are dedicated to each of our county partners. We are undergoing the configuration sessions. We have access to a test site. So we are well on the way of that implementation. We are on track for a spring 2027 launch of the new system. I do want to note that this new HMIS configuration is the final component for achieving our full Built for Zero scorecard. There's a scorecard for how well you were doing in terms of your continuous improvement with your data. We are at 27 of 29 on that scorecard, and the final 2 will be achieved with the implementation, and those are addressing data comprehensiveness with a more effective data outreach collection system and enhanced shelter data system. So that will be helping us achieve those final check marks on that scorecard. Next slide, please. Similar to the other counties, this is what our spending looks like by program as so far in fiscal year 2026 as of Q2. Next slide. This is also our spend down. So what you're seeing here is the dark blue is what we sort of estimated we would spend by quarter, and then the yellow is what we've actually spent so far. Spending higher is good news. That means that we are above our spend rate. As a part of our work with Metro, we set an annual spend goal. Ours is set at 80% for the year, so that blue adds up to 80%. So if we spend above each quarter, that means we're getting more programs out the door, but we have room before we hit that 100. So we anticipate spending at a minimum 80%, which is our goal. And you can see that it goes up over time because we anticipate lower spend in the first quarter, and we typically spend more in those later quarters of the year. I will now pass it to Washington County.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning. For the record, Jess Larson, I use she and her pronouns, and I'm one of our assistant directors at the Department of Housing Services in Washington County. It's a pleasure to be here. You've seen this slide now 3 times, so I will go quickly over this because you are familiar with the data and understanding how it's all rolling up to that regional level of how we're achieving our outcomes in our housing programs and our shelter programs. I will, though, pause and take some time to describe the homeless prevention line, which you're noting is still at 0%, but that's because, as planned, the program that we set a goal for, I think it's 300 is the goal, was set knowing that the program was not going to launch until Q3. So there was no data because it's not to begun. In fact, this program, as you'll find as we proceed with the next 2 quarters, will far exceed the initial goal because thank you to the Metro Council and one-time administrative funds, we were able to increase our activities in eviction prevention. As you will recall, these goals were set before the state budget concluded last year. And in that process, we learned that our partners at Community Action who implement eviction prevention for Washington County had received a 60% reduction in those resources from the state level. So through your action, we were able to jumpstart or help lift up that program back to its original funding level through the state program. And you will start to see those data points roll in through the Q3 and Q4 of this program year 6. So we fully anticipate to be at or above all of the goals set for this programmatic year. Next slide. The local highlight I wanted to bring before you all to lift up is our exciting work in transitional housing in Washington County. As you've heard me describe, over the few years we've been working to build out this new system in Washington County. We were launching permanent supportive housing through the HCMS program and rapid rehousing, substantially expanding that beyond what we could fund with our $5 million COC program before supportive housing services, and really significantly increasing our shelter programs. Before SHS, we did not have a single bed that operated year-round in Washington County for single individuals and couples, only family beds and only youth beds, and they were only in about the 50-unit capacity total. So we've made significant strides in building out that foundation of a homeless services system in Washington County, and here as we in year 5, we began to see the need for a missing component of our system, and that is transitional housing. We did not have any of these recovery-based programs where the supports are wrapped around a longer stay in a participation-based program to help someone get a little more stability under their belt before entering into full-time permanent tenancy through a permanent supportive housing or other independent housing program. So we were excited to launch this program through a funding opportunity last year, and this year we're happy to share with you that these 2 projects are well underway. Transcending Hope is breaking ground on their behavioral health-focused transitional housing program that will partner with state-funded programs that are serving aid and assist populations to help them transition into recovery-based transitional housing for their mental health needs, and then move through to long-term stable housing, whatever will best meet those individuals where they are at. And then Cornell Road is under construction now to renovate an older hotel that was acquired by our housing authority, and anticipate we will be opening this new recovery program focused on people coming through substance use treatment programs, especially our new CAT in Washington County, so that they can live in a clean and sober environment with recovery programming to help them continue their recovery journey before they move on to stable housing, get back into work, whatever the case may be for each individual. We're also going to co-locate our medical respite program there with Virginia Garcia and hope to be expanding that program through the new capacity that the Cornell Road project brings to our system. So all in all, over the next year, we will be adding 110 units. I would like to take this moment to just note that this will actually increase our point-in-time count, because transitional housing is a part of our shelter count, and with 110 new beds in our system, we're going to be able to shelter 110 individuals, and more individuals than we have been. And what we've been finding in our point-in-time count when we compare our shelter count to our unsheltered count, actually unsheltered housing has been decreasing in Washington County, while unsheltered homelessness has been decreasing, while sheltered homelessness has been increasing because of programs like this transitional housing expansion. So very exciting work underway with our partners, and you will be invited to some grand openings soon. Next slide, please. And then for our regional highlight, as you're noticing, we're each taking a turn describing one of our regional efforts underway through the county and metro partnership. And my role today is to get to describe the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program. This is a beloved project of mine, having been a case manager for many years and knowing what a difference a voucher can make in ending someone's homelessness. It's often the first component in any recipe that's going to end homelessness. And ARLA has been nothing but transformational for our region. 3,744 vouchers are in action in our community, housing people who used to be homeless. For Washington County, those 1,713 vouchers represent a 50% increase in voucher capacity for our housing authority. I can't imagine a housing authority anywhere else in the country that can describe that level of increase in capacity, and that is everything to do with our regional efforts here and the brilliant strategy behind this regional long-term rent assistance program. So we are super proud of it and working to further its impactfulness through efficiencies and helping people move through, like the program that Lauren was describing in Clackamas. And continuing to practice our regional coordination work to make those refinements. And one item I wanted to bring for your attention is a question that has come up around porting vouchers. This is something that all housing authorities do with their traditional housing choice vouchers, and I believe mainly a housing choice voucher program. So it's a well understood concept that allows an individual to move from one housing authority to the next. And so as we created this regional housing voucher, we wanted to make sure that people would have the choice to move across counties. And so we do have a system in place, and so far we've had 14 households of those 3,744 request to be ported, and 7 have been successfully ported, meaning they moved their family from one county to the next, and they were able to be reassigned or retain their case management services. Because unlike housing choice vouchers, which are primarily just rent assistance alone, our ARLA voucher program is almost, I believe, entirely a wraparound supports a PSH program. So we have to both coordinate the transition of the rent assistance to a different housing authority, but also the transition of the case management services to a different service provider. And so the one challenge for your awareness and why we are still working to support those 7 households who are waiting to be ported is the challenge of capacity in the receiving jurisdiction. So both the capacity of space in the ARLA voucher capacity, and right now as we are in year 6, we are at full utilization generally across the 3 counties. So we have to wait for a space to come up in ARLA, and then also space in a referring agency who can continue to provide those case management services. And of course, if it's a youth household, we would want to pair them with a youth services agency in a different county. So it's quite complicated to port both the voucher and the services, but we do have a track record of success so far and are continuing to process the households who have not yet been able to make that transition. My last 2 slides will look a lot like my colleagues' slides with our expenditures. You can see it's hard to use the colors because they're a little bit distributed awkwardly, but permanent supportive housing, the biggest slice of the pie in that light brown, is the biggest portion of our investments through supportive housing services, and where we are primarily serving population A, of course. Though, of course, our safety off the street programs and other programs are often working with people with chronic homelessness needs and connecting them to those longer term supports. The one area in the next slide, you'll see that we're a little behind in spending, but as Anna described, this is a spend rate goal, and we anticipate to catch up and be on track. I believe our total adds up closer to 95%. I'm sorry, I'm not on the spot able to do fast math. But nonetheless, just a note that some of the spend rate has to do with major capital projects that did not get booked in Q2 but are still underway, and we expect them to get booked before the end of the fiscal year. So those are significant expenses that can shift the percentage of the spend rate. So I'll just leave you there with that kind of high level overview of our financial investments and exciting programmatic work underway, and happy to take questions at the end of the presentation. Do I pass it to RJ?
Yep. Thank you, Jess. Good morning, or almost good afternoon. RJ Stanglin, he, him pronouns. I'm the Metro's Housing Department Finance Manager. And we're just gonna do a brief overview of where we're at in terms of the gross tax revenue. On the left with the blue is where we are at the end of December with about 104 million in gross tax revenue. The beige tan is the fiscal year 26 budget. Do bear in mind that that budget was based on the prior year fall forecast from December of 2024. And then the orange is the updated fall forecast that was published last December. And you'll see there's about a 7% increase potential in gross tax revenue. Next slide, please. Actually, the point on that one is the increase was primarily due to late business taxes collected in October. That was a complete outlier. If you go to the tax website, you will see that spike in October that was about 30 million unexpected in back taxes. Next slide, please. You've seen this slide before. I just want to show the exponential growth in spending, and then we get to year 5 where you kind of see the budget is leveling off. And that's because the last couple fall forecasts have really shown that there is no longer going to be significant growth in the tax revenue just due to economic forecasting. You'll see that the expenses for up to end of December for all 3 counties totaled a little over 130 million. The thing to really point out is that 130 million is over the 104 in gross tax revenue that we currently collected. So it's really important to understand that prior year carryover is critical to be able to continue services just in the nature of this tax. This is the month where we're gonna get the bulk of the tax revenue, and hopefully in May, we will have great numbers on what that looks like, and we'll have a better understanding of where we'll land at the end of the year. Next slide, please. And then this is the aggregate of all expenses for the region. As the counties have explained, the top three categories, when you aggregate them, it's almost 3/4 of the spending. First one being permanent supportive housing, awesome. Next one is safety on and off the streets, that's the shelter transitional outreach work. And then the third is rapid rehousing for taking people at risk and literally homeless and getting them into housing placements. And then lastly, I'll just note that the county administrative rate is averaging just a little above, or a little below 6% at 5.7 right now at the end of December. And with that, we're open to questions.
Okay. Well, thank you all. A lot of information to take in. We'll open for questions. Colleagues, Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I have a couple of different threads that I want to follow. First, I want to thank you, Jess, for meeting head on where I've raised portability as a major concern. We have a regional voucher. We should be able to let folks choose where they live, close to work, close to school, close to family. And those things ebb and flow as people's lives changes. So it just makes sense. So I'm glad to see that you've brought some evidence. Shannon Callahan at Clackamas County actually told me that 20% of their vouchers are at some level ported, which is a striking number and dramatically different from the data that you showed. I'm not asking you to respond to that. I'm just putting it out there as a outlier. And I do think the level of complexity you describe and really having only achieved 50% success shows that it's complicated. And we need to better resource, and I don't know how we better resource without making it a regional priority to really make the matchmaking happen. And these aren't one-off cases. People's lives change. We need to be ready to meet them where they're at. So thank you for diving in. Thank you for telling some of the real stats. I'm happy to have you respond to that.
May I? Thank you, Counselor. Vahid helped me prepare for this portion of our regional update on our reporting and shared that in Clackamas County, and Lauren, please correct me, that several households, or it may be the 20%, so I don't want to put a number to it, but Clackamas County is able to allow participants in their programs to lease up in Multnomah County and still provide services to them. So they might not be captured in the porting number, which is the official transition, but it's more the kind of intention of flexibility in action through the way they implement their ARLA program.
Awesome, thank you. Then my second question, Multnomah County, it's 2026 and you just got an outreach manual published. I would love to know a little bit more about the inputs to that. I know that the theory has always been that we have excellent providers in this region, many of whom who kind of set some national standards when it comes to good best practices. How did it take us so long to actually come up with Multnomah County philosophy of how outreach should be done in our region?
I'm going to let Kanoy speak to the inputs to the manual, but in terms of the length of time, I think you've landed on really the concept of how we are building a system, right? And outreach and the way that outreach is defined, and we actually define it in 3 different ways, has developed over time as a concept. Is it housing focused? Is it survival focused? Is it service focused? Or is it all 3, right? What do we want to prioritize within those 3 options? Multnomah County is a pretty provider-driven, like grassroots system, and our providers have really led the definition of what it means to do outreach. But now that we're investing in that to such a high degree, we need to really formalize what that looks like and make sure that as we're bringing providers on board, they have clearer guidance in what we mean when we say outreach and what we're asking them to do. So it's really just been a part of the development of the system, and we are working really hard and long on that outreach manual, and it is, to your point, quite close. Do you want to speak to the inputs of it?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah. Other than we spent all year working not only with the outreach providers, we had advisory bodies, our lived experience advisory body and our equity advisory body. But Anna, to your point, we've been doing outreach for years. This is really just codifying and ensuring that we have the set standards of Are we all tracking the correct performance measures? Are we all tracking it in the same way? Do we even know when we're talking about it, what we're actually tracking? So it's formalizing and standardizing to ensure when we say outreach, we're all speaking kind of in the same vein.
Thank you.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Acting President Wong. I appreciate that. Thank you all for coming and just reporting on the progress in the system. Really excited about the HMIS work, and I just think the opportunity to all play from a modernized, updated playbook feels really important. And I know that especially overhauling a system as big and as integrated and daily operations is huge. So huge fan of that and that RIF investment. I have a question about the way that the spending categorization was made. And this is RJ also to the three counties here, specifically around the eviction prevention. I know that it's an important tool, and I think I saw it was 3%, and it was like $5.4 million or something like that. So I guess I'm a little confused about are we classifying money differently in different buckets now? I mean, I know that we allocated $8 million to Washington County through the unspent reserves from Metro Council. So I guess that's my question. Or are we just not using SHS money, but we're using other money for eviction prevention in the region?
So I don't believe the category has changed.
Okay.
I just think that some of the invoicing for eviction prevention has just been lower than it has been. If you look at their budgets,
Okay.
it will increase by the end of the year.
It will increase by the end of the year. Okay. So is it like organizations or providers are providing it, but we'll invoice it later? Is that kind of what
I can speak for Multnomah County.
Yeah,
We
I
have
just wanna understand.
different sources of funding that fund eviction prevention, and we spend the most restrictive source first. So for our spending, the SHS spending on eviction prevention will be later in the year because we're spending the other more restricted sources first.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
The other thing to note, Clackamas also does like a soft close. So every quarter I update the prior quarter too. So there's probably some pending invoices for their costs as well.
Okay, thanks. And a question for kind of the similar categorization of things, in seeing permanent supportive housing be a large chunk of spending at each of the three counties. Are we all defining that as the same kind of investment, the same population across the three counties, or are they slightly different, like apples and oranges or apples and apples?
Yeah, I can lead this one off. And you all might remember our 2024 Metro audit that called this in a bit to be like, what do we mean when we say permanent supportive housing and where are we headed with that? And I think as part of that work, we really have done some intentional work with our county partners, similar to what Anna was describing in outreach. These are programs that have been around for quite some time, and getting really clear around what we mean when we say that is critical. We have worked and finalized actually an administrative role draft around permanent supportive housing that clearly articulates when we say that, what do we mean? What does that feel like for a household? That land is both the definition for permanent supportive housing for the region, the criteria, the eligibility, what do wraparound services look like, for how long. So we will be bringing that to you all later this year as part of your SHS reform package. But I think throughout that process, I think Metro was thrilled to see actually how much alignment there was in that definition. There is, of course, some nuances that we're working on across the region, and that's just part of, each county implementing this program in a local way to be supportive to their communities. But for the most part, we are landing the main cornerstones of PSH in the regional way.
Yeah, thanks. I think to me, it's really important that our definitions are broad, but not too broad, making sure that I think basic storytelling and communicating with voters, with everyday people about what it is that we're doing, I think is important. So I thank you, Yesenia, for that. And I guess last more open-ended question for our county partners is we're living through a unprecedented time. I hate that word, unprecedented. I yearn for precedented times. In that, our state budget, federal government funding is drying up, and this tool is more and more important. So I think I'm curious to hear from y'all in terms of if the region could ask and like come together to ask the state for one thing that SHS is not paying for, what would that be? That's a part of like the ecosystem of
This is a Jess question.
Oh, no. I hope we all answer. Thank you, Counselor, for the question. I'll offer eviction prevention because this is where the significant cut has been made. And one of the challenging policy decisions we're having in Washington County is in order to achieve the intentions of the supportive housing services around population A and population B split, we made an intention decision to reduce funding in eviction prevention before the state made their decision on their budget this last year. And so those issues are kind of in conflict. If the state is not bringing forward the eviction prevention that we had counted on, it's harder to achieve our 75-25 split and operate a whole system of response to homelessness. So that's where I would start, but I bet there are good other ideas.
Thanks.
I would agree that eviction prevention is a major challenge for us in this time because those populations do tend to be Pop B. And it's a really important part of our system. I would hesitate.
Tend to be what? Sorry, I didn't catch
Oh, sorry, population B.
Oh, Pop B.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like Poppy. I was
No, Pop B, excuse me,
You're good.
That being said, the funding that we're spending on those other buckets, I would not want to go away. So if it was an addition, yes, but I think we still, as a region, do need to focus on permanent supportive housing, and housing is a major part of our work. And we are, as a region, not sure how we're gonna solve the problem of eviction prevention.
Clackamas County, I would echo the same thing. Eviction prevention is going to be a big service, and also rural services, because we have a lot of areas outside of the UGB that we can't serve folks.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, well, I know, we have our first RPOC meeting next week, and so very much looking forward to working with you, and I think we have some hard months ahead, but I think important months to rally, and I don't think there's a lot of easy decisions around how we continue to prioritize and continue to lead with dignity, with care, respect, and thank you for just being on the front lines and reporting out to us, and definitely looking forward to the important work to regionalize the system, to continue doing that work, and hopefully, continuing to tell the story and show voters that this measure is highly impactful, and it's something that we need to continue. Thank you.
Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to dig a little deeper into some issues that have already been raised. Councilor Lewis raised the question about portability. And I'd like to ask a pretty simple question, and that is, do we have a consistent practice of who funds? Does the sending county fund the porting of the rent voucher and other services, or does the receiving county? Or is there not a standard practice?
Thank you, Counselor. I'll take a go at this answer. The purpose of porting is to say this person is leaving our system and moving to another system. Will you receive them? And so that means, will you take on the responsibility of funding their services and overseeing that programmatic work? And that's the technical work that has to happen of both the capacity in the receiving jurisdiction and the process for making that transition. As I responded
Does it have to be that way, Jess?
I'm sorry, Counselor?
Is that a federal requirement?
This is a regionally operated program that is, we aren't limited by federal requirements, but the design of porting began with through the implementation of housing choice vouchers that have been funded by by HUD through our housing authorities for decades. So I'm sure it is influenced by the practice of housing authorities in porting vouchers.
And I appreciate that explanation, that helps. But is there anything that is not within the control of the entities represented by the people in this room, i.e. Metro and the 3 counties? Is there anything that we couldn't collectively control to change that practice?
I understand your question, Counselor, to be, is this policy that we have full control in determining? And I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for that. And any of the other two counties have something else to add, although this one seems to fall under Washington County's lead?
Jess has it right.
Okay, great. Second, Mr. Chair, if I might, second area I'd like to dig in a little more is on Councilor Gonzalez's. And it had to do with his raising issues about common definitions. And I'm interested in understanding whether we have common definitions, not just of permanent supportive housing services, but are we absolutely clear on how we're defining population A and population B? And is it the same assessment process that is conducted by each county, or do we still have differences? And the follow-on to that is, do we have tiers within population A in particular of intensity of need that would be helpful in defining what types and what extent of services the recipients need? Is that common among the three counties, or do we have differences that make it hard to compare?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Nolan, for the question. I'll just note that part of the administrative rules process that I described earlier, that's one of your reform packages that you passed legislation around last December. We are clearly articulating for the main services areas that we fund, so including permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, shelter, housing with services, housing only. There might be one or two there that I might be missing. We are providing clear regional definitions that we're working alongside our county partners to understand what the work that they are currently doing and how we regionalize some of that to ensure that we do have the same ongoing definitions that are being operationalized in the same way across the region. As part of that work, we've also kind of have embarked and have almost formed like a work group, I would say, for the last year or so, really looking at population A, and then that's also being embedded into this administrative process.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Really formalizing population A and the characteristics, I think, that I'm hearing you describe around the different tiers that associate to that. What the definition is, what the different characteristics that would make someone population A. And the counties are working to like implement some of that work now. Now, I think to your point around, is that being all tracked in the same way? There's gonna be an intake form that is applied across the region in the same way. There's going to be that information is going to be tracked into their homeless management information system. Each county then has their own coordinated entry system that, you know, we're working really hard to align and ensure that there's regional consistency there. But given how their coordinated entry system might work, there could be some nuances. But at the end of the day, given how we're structuring the definitions and the work, we as Metro will be able to regionalize that data and bring that to you all, the Regional Policy and Oversight Committee, and really start to look at across the region. This is the sort of analysis and information that we can run for population A and B.
To the question of acuity, it's not actually a part of our definition, but I did want to highlight, since you asked, an exciting thing we're doing in Multnomah County with HealthShare, where we are able to pull our HMIS data and then work with HealthShare to compare that to their user data, so we can really get a sense of what are the actual needs and how many folks do we have in our high acuity behavioral health cohort, which is folks who have high acuity in terms of behavioral health or substance use disorder and are homeless. And we can see how many of those folks are in our PSH, what their needs might be. And we're using it both to kind of understand the system and also to start some case conferencing work. So there is work happening to better understand like what acuity looks like across the population in partnership with HealthShare.
Thank you for that. And just to wrap up, Mr. Chair, these services and these programs have a very personal, individual aspect to them. And each individual, each household, each family has a different kind of combination of exactly what they need in this moment or over the next 1 year, 5 years to succeed in moving out of homelessness. And at the same time, there are known practices, known services that we have some evidence-based analysis of how effective they are. And I'm interested in what the counties individually have done to define how effective their services are. You might have more complicated definitions, but a simple one is how much of your goal are you achieving, or how much of the overall existing population in your county is being served. And then the other one that we rarely talk about is how efficiently are we providing those services? Are there things that you can learn, each county can learn longitudinally from what you've done in the past to improve the efficiency of meeting your goals, meeting the service, as well as across the counties, learn from each other?
Yeah, I will say, I'll speak to two ways we think about the effectiveness and efficiency of our services. For effectiveness, we really look at housing retention, both in our rapid rehousing and in our permanent supportive housing programs. We track retention at 6, 12, and 24 months. For permanent supportive housing, that is once somebody has accessed that housing placement, because that subsidy is imagined to be long-term. And we are in the high 80s at that 24-month mark for retention in our permanent supportive housing programs. Okay. For rapid rehousing, that is an up to 2-year subsidy. We track retention in those programs once that subsidy has actually ended, because the goal of rapid rehousing is you're helping someone on a short-term basis so they can then maintain that housing on their own. And we also track that at 6, 12, and 24 months post-subsidy. And we are also in the high 80s for retention and housing in those programs. One of the primary ways I think about effectiveness, I'll talk about one so I don't take up too much time, is we are focusing a lot on our shelter programs and how efficient those programs are at moving people into housing. Shelter is, of course, also a safety intervention. It is a safer place to be than sleeping outside, but it also should be leading to housing, as housing is the ultimate goal. So Multnomah County is focusing really hard on improving the effectiveness of our shelters as pathways to housing, and that's a way that we think about the effectiveness and the efficiency of our programs.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Counselor, for that question. I think what I'll just add is that as Continuum of Cares, which each of the 3 counties are, we are also required by HUD to submit multiple reports annually that do exactly what you're describing, measure how our system is working. One example is the system performance metrics, length of time homelessness, with very specific elements to how that metric is defined. And this is annual work we do for HUD because we're required, and then use to evaluate our system. And this is the kind of metric work and continued performance improvement discussion that we are about to convene under the KPI work with this regional conversation. So you're gonna become more familiar with this as well, but I just wanna assure you that this is work the counties have done and will continue to do as Continuum of Cares.
For Clackamas, I'll just add, you're right. I mean, every household is different. Every household has different needs, and we truly believe that people hold the answers. Every single household's going to look differently. But the last few years has just been, it's been a lot of wild building and a lot of fast moving. We had to build the programs out. And for Clackamas, we're currently at a place where we're looking at that effectiveness specifically with our program. So we're building a scorecard. We're doing quarterly reports with all of our providers to show effectiveness of their programs and helping them access TA as much as possible to help them succeed and help those services become even more effective. So that's where Clackamas County is at with that.
Thanks. And Mr. Chair, I know
Yeah, we have 5 minutes left for 2 more questions.
But I didn't get anybody to answer my question about efficiency. How much do you spend per household needing permanent supportive housing? How much do you spend per shelter transition into transitional housing? And we don't have time to go into detail here, but I think the public expects us to have answers to that.
We can follow up.
We'll follow up. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair. Just, first of all, I want to say I appreciate the fact that you're all here making this presentation. I think it's really quite helpful because you understand we hear some of the nuances. When this process started, it was like everybody was speaking a different language. Now I understand you're speaking the same language, slightly different dialects as is appropriate because the situation, the demographics are different in each county. So I appreciate that. And I hear most of the same terms, some differences. My first question was going to be, and I think you already answered it, I was going to be asking you what you think are the biggest challenges going forward for the next 2 quarters. And I think you already said eviction prevention is probably the biggest challenge, but if that's not correct, then correct me as wrong. And the second question I have is, if I was a young person experiencing temporarily periodic homelessness, would I see a fairly seamless process between the 3 counties? We all know that they're a fairly mobile group sometimes. So so those 2 questions. Is there anything else that's a big challenge going forward the next 2 quarters that is not related to eviction prevention funding? And what about the youth cohort?
On the challenge piece, I will say something we're thinking a lot about is we have high retention in our PSH buildings, but we know sometimes folks could use some more support to support the environment in the building. We're hearing a lot from our landlords and affordable housing providers who are struggling to make sure the folks in the buildings, particularly units that are like fully PSH, that environment is supportive of folks wanting to be there. And so thinking about how we, with the funding that we have per household for PSH, are truly supporting people in those placements, I think is an ongoing challenge that we're coming together as a region to think about and make sure we're truly doing permanent supportive housing the way that it needs to be done.
For Clackamas County, our biggest challenge is just the obvious funding uncertainty, and it just feels like playing Tetris right now, trying to figure out what are our core needs. You know, what does a level 1 system look like? What does an enhanced system look like? So that's our biggest challenge right now. Is trying to plan for future years without knowing that. And then as far as the youth, we do have a program planner, and we have a whole system of care around the youth. So I would say in Clackamas it is a seamless system and a lot of collaboration with our other counties as needed.
Counselor, thank you for the question. When I think of the work in the next 2 quarters, I think of just the workload. Time moves so fast, and so really we're planning for system improvements that are kind of the next 18 months or 2 years out, but pushing through to get the current fiscal year done and wrapped up and ready for the next fiscal year, and all the contracts out the door to all of our providers. And so I think that's just kind of like the reality of the work over the next 2 quarters. And in Washington County, you know, Boys and Girls Aid and Home Plate are our preeminent, wonderful youth partners, and doing a great job keeping up with the needs of our youth system. I think where we're seeing in our data is it's really the disabled individuals who are aging, that we're struggling most to find enough capacity in our system. That's the population that is falling behind most in our capacity.
And then real quick from Multnomah County, there's no wrong door with the youth system. I mean, I worked in the youth system. It's a very flexible, young people go throughout all of the counties as well. We have a high level of coordination across the counties, but also just a young person being able to access different spaces. It doesn't matter where they access, to be able to enter into a coordinated system of services. So it sounds like we all very similar, and we have 5 providers within our system.
Thank you. I know we have 1 minute left with you all, based on time. This is a great conversation, but every question is actually 3 questions because we want folks to answer from all across the region. I think I'll just make my point as a point, another question, so we have just time to wrap up. But I have been hearing a lot from our coalition partners around continual improvement and having a framework for that. I've seen a lot of improvement, which is great, but I think that's one thing that we talked about in our March, RPOC resolution, was having a shared framework and system for continual improvement. We'll dive into that deeper, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. I know Multnomah County actually has a pretty fleshed out and operational version. I'm be curious to know what all the counties are doing and how, we can learn from each other. So that's not a question, but will be soon. And Councilor Lewis, you're going to wrap us up.
Sure, I just had a provocative thought. It's a real challenge working with so many different types of funding. And so I understand why so often our funding that is truly flexible gets pigeonholed into programs that were built around federal or state requirements, because that's how we've done things for years. But here with eviction prevention, which is really good work, really essential, prevents people from getting into the homeless system to begin with. We have the state backing out. We want the state to come back in at some point in the future, but we have this brief window of time where why don't we work across the 3 counties to align our systems, not to what the state standards used to be, but what we want them to be. And all 3 counties really could say, we're gonna have the same set of standards where every provider who offers eviction prevention has the same rules around maximum amount of dollars, maximum number of times you can ask for eviction prevention in a year, how you actually do the work of pushing the money into the landlord pocket. So I know we're in a place where we want the state to get back in because it's such a critical program. Let's capitalize on this moment of time to practice doing what we want to do as a region for eviction prevention.
Okay, well, many more conversations to come. Thank you for the great work. Really appreciate you all coming into Metro and sharing.
Nicely done.
Okay, we're gonna move on to our resolution for the day. This is resolution number 26-5585 for the purpose of approving fiscal year 25-26 funding for grants funded with a construction excise tax. We will now be turning to one resolution we are considering regarding the 2040 planning and development grants. As we do each quarter, we consider one grant today. Additionally, we will hear an update from one of our grantees on a project that was recently completed. In 2023, Metro awarded a 2040 planning and development grant to the City of Portland to support development of the Green Loop. So today we have Prosper Portland staff with us today to share an overview of the project and recommendations for next steps. And we also have Metro staff here, Sarah Breckstone, the 2040 Grants Program Manager, and Hal Hagedorn, Community Investments Manager. Welcome and thanks for waiting.
Good afternoon, councilors. I'm Sarah Breakstone. I manage the 2040 Planning and Development Grants Program. Before we get into this grant cycle, I would like to introduce Kiana Ballo. She is with Prosper Portland, and she's here to give you an overview of the Green Loop project, which was funded through a 2040 grant in 2023 and has wrapped up. And I will let Kiana take it from here. And can we pull up her presentation, please? Thanks.
Hi, thanks for having me today. So I'm here to talk about our Portland Green Loop study. Next slide, please. Are you all seeing the full slide?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Okay. So just for some context around the Green Loop, this project was identified in the Central City 2035 plan. It aims to connect many of the Central City major neighborhoods, development sites, and cultural destinations with a linear park that supports placemaking, accessibility, and economic development. When we're thinking about the Green Loop, it's not just a line on a map. It's really intertwined with the public spaces, storefronts, and attractions both on and adjacent to the loop. And this distinction becomes important when we start thinking about public-private partnerships. Next slide, please. So some additional context that there have been a number of planning efforts related to the Green Loop. Our project's focus was really on 3 goals. 1, to identify key design elements that create distinct character, balancing with the ease of ongoing maintenance, assessing long-term management strategies, funding mechanisms, and public-private partnerships, and studying effective strategies for community engagement, placemaking, and cultural programming. Next slide, please. So the first part of the project was doing a best practices analysis with 6 case studies from around the nation. Next slide, please. You'll see here there's quite a range in what these case studies look like, but there's lessons to be learned from all of the projects in their different stages of development and management. Some case studies were chosen for their similarity to Portland, and others were chosen for their demonstrated success in design, governance, or activation. I'll give you a moment to read through a little bit. Next slide, please. For the purpose of this project, the way we looked at design was a bit of a lighter touch given other efforts focused in this area with more detail. But some of our key observations from the case studies included the importance of brand identity, balancing district neighborhood character, and continuity throughout the trail. The design for both interim and permanent build-out is key when we're thinking about governance and activation with successful linear parks. And then developing a welcoming and accessible trail that facilitates public spaces that are easy for people to enjoy and are good neighbors to commercial activity. Next slide, please. So we also researched the governance structures for each of the case studies and took into consideration their funding sources for construction and maintenance, the roles and responsibilities required for operating, and the types of activations they use to generate and maintain excitement around their projects. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk through all of the governance structures in detail, but just wanted to give you a quick visual of kind of how these projects flow. So in the top, you'll see in the green ovals the designated private and public funding sources, and the lead management entities and their responsibilities in the black boxes, with the coordinating agencies and their responsibilities in the gray boxes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And one more. Thank you. And so the next part of our project was doing a deep dive into the local context for the Portland Green Loop. This was done through 3 focus groups and analysis of 5 key nodes on the alignment. Next slide, please. So you'll see the geographic areas. We split up the focus groups into West Side, the Albina Rose Quarter Lloyd area, and the OMSI Central East Side area. The focus groups were convened to engage representatives from organizations active along the Green Loop alignment to better understand their roles in programming, activation, and enhancement in their distinct geographic areas. We explored how participants could contribute to future programming, operations, and stewardship, and identified additional community members and organizations to involve in upcoming planning and decision-making to ensure broad and inclusive participation. While each focus group participant brought different priorities and perspectives, a common topic was how the Green Loop has a strong potential to support these organizations and pursue their individual missions. Next phase was the in-field assessment, which we aimed to evaluate how some of the existing public spaces along the Green Loop are managed and maintained. The assessment focused on 5 key nodes on the west side of the Green Loop to illustrate activation potential for the full alignment, along with Sunday Parkways, which connects multiple of these nodes. We chose this segment for the in-field assessment as it's the most robust section of the Green Loop that currently exists and provides the most insight to what needs to occur to elevate the whole alignment to the next level. Some of the observations from the in-field assessment included public ownership with delegated or shared management, the use of formal agreements and permits, maintenance and cleaning responsibilities falling with private and non-profit partners, a layered approach to security enforcement with public and private sectors taking on different responsibilities. And then we also analyzed a few examples of local public-private partnerships, including Pioneer Square, Portland Mall Management, and the Peabot Street Plaza program. Next slide, please. Some of the themes coming out of the focus groups and in-field assessment highlight that there are many strengths for Portland to build upon. One of the things we started to talk about in this project was loopification, or thinking about how we can connect the existing activations and expertise along the alignment. So our collective challenge is really to how can we unite and amplify what is existing rather than starting from scratch? To start to build a coalition for public-private partnerships, the city and the private sector need to be aligned on the collective desire to implement and demonstrate the capacity to promote, maintain, and activate the Green Loop. Next slide, please. And so that led us into our recommendation section. Next slide, please. Starting off with design implementation, these recommendations really focus on maintaining a cohesive identity, reflecting the district character, and ensuring functional and equitable design across the city. The Green Loop will be developed in phases, often in partnership with private developers that's tied to new construction. Because development will not follow a linear sequence, some segments may initially be temporary or low impact. Despite the phased approach, we need a consistent design language that visually and experientially tie the Green Loop together. As the Green Loop winds through diverse Portland districts, its design should honor and reflect each area's unique history, culture, and community priorities while contributing to a cohesive all-over identity. The design must be practical, durable, and maintainable over time, and it should ensure that all districts along the Green Loop receive a consistent quality and investment regardless of the development timeline. Next slide, please. So getting into some of our programming and activation implementation recommendations. As I said, Portland has a strong portfolio of existing events and potential partners that can support the Green Loop with some additional coordination. We developed a pilot on paper plan to translate research findings into an actionable proposal that implementation partners can use to both stage the activation and support grant activations or applications. The pilot activation can help develop a consortium of stakeholders and strategically demonstrate the capacity to execute these projects and programs and refine the expectations, mission, and responsibilities as a foundation for a more permanent public-private partnership. The activation itself is 3 months long with about 9 months of planning work involved. And a key step will be establishing a dedicated organization to manage the third-party programming and promote events along and near the Green Loop. While many active plazas, parks, and businesses already exist in the corridor, a single coordinating body can streamline communication, identify opportunities, and help transform the Green Loop. A dedicated coordinating entity can provide centralized programming, permitting, and customer support that would help the Green Loop be easily recognizable and maintain efficient management. The managing entity can also encourage additional programming with third parties, sponsored and partnered events, rather than doing all of the events themselves. Next slide, please. And so when we're looking at the organizational and governance recommendations, we're recommending a phased approach, kind of building on that pilot activation. So phase 1 is a combination of pilot demonstrations and a need for leadership in convening a consortium of stakeholders from both the public and private sectors. Case studies show the power of pop-up installations and testing segments to build public awareness and support and capacity. Phase 2 would build upon the momentum of phase 1 to create a more formal structure for accountability for funding, operations, and maintenance. Next slide, please. And so finally, getting to our next steps. Coming out of this project, we can use these recommendations to help guide the Green Loop's development, both in the near-term and long-term stages of implementation, especially as PBOT continues to develop their Green Loop concept plan and considers design for interim and permanent build-out. This is a critical tool to begin developing partnerships, structuring programming, and building momentum to bring the Green Loop into its next phase of life. And next slide, please. That is the conclusion of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much. That's an exciting concept. I remember biking the loop in Atlanta and also in New York City and the High Line. So I can see a lot of great economic development and just activation opportunities. So Thanks for all the work. Colleagues, any questions?
It's a great project.
Great project.
Thank you.
Please
Thanks
keep
for
us
having me.
updated.
Huh?
Please keep us updated on,
Oh, for sure.
on future progress.
Thanks, Kiana. I think we can move on. How do you want to start?
Yeah,
Can we
great.
pull up the
So-
other presentation?
Thank you, Kiana. Good morning, council. If we can switch to the 2040 updates, that would be great. Good morning. Oh, actually, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, council. For the record, I'm Hal Hagedorn. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Community Investment Manager in the Planning, Development, and Research Department. Sarah Breakstone and I are here to talk about the 2040 grant program. And before I hand it over to Sarah, I'd like to provide some updates and context. So next slide. So today we're bringing forward recommendations from the first grant cycle of this calendar year. We are working on getting under contract with the City of Portland on the Gresham Spring Water Area Planning Project, which is intended to implement recommendations from their first Phase 1 2040 grant, which was previously funded. We've awarded about $2.5 million in grants in the past year. And we have projects that have been awarded and are moving along. And with that, I will hand it over to Sarah to provide some of the project updates and the rest of the presentation.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Hal. I was going to give you some detailed information about a couple projects that have wrapped up. I'm kind of assuming that we want to move this quickly, so maybe I will give less information than I had planned. But I did want to highlight a couple projects that have wrapped in recent months. In 2023, we awarded $100,000 to Washington County to do enhanced engagement work around the Tualatin Valley Highway Equitable Development Strategy. They had a really great process and some really good outcomes. They wrapped up maybe 5 months ago. Also in 2023, we awarded a grant to Portland. I think it was a $350,000 grant to do an industrial lands readiness study that was really focused on matching up available industrial sites with target industries with a focus on increasing land supply for middle wage job growth. Sorry, that was a mouthful. Also, some really good outcomes. I'm not going to go into more detail other than to tell you that if you want more information, I'm happy to provide it. I have final reports and summary documents for both of those. And then also a quick update on the Albina Vision Trust master planning process. We awarded them $750,000 in late 2024 to do a Central City master plan on a 10-acre site in the Albina neighborhood. That project got off to a bit of a slow start. A lot of work obviously happening in the background, but the grant-funded part of the work has more recently kicked off. But I'm happy to report that they have selected their consulting team for the master planning work, and they are going to start that project, the grant-funded portion of that project, in earnest. They'll start with some existing conditions analyses and then move into a phase of community engagement that will lay the groundwork for developing preliminary concepts for the site. So I'll leave our updates at that for now, and if we could go to the next slide. So for this quarter, we have gone through our usual process, updated materials, reminder emails out to our parties. We asked for letters of interest and had quite a few meetings with potential applicants. Full applications were due January 16th. We received 2 applications this cycle. One is being recommended for funding today, and the other is receiving some technical assistance and will be back next quarter. Next slide. Always want to acknowledge and thank our screening committee for their efforts in making their recommendations for funding. Here they are. Next slide, please. So for today, I will give you an overview of the recommended grant proposals. The proposal and the one that's being recommended for technical assistance. And then council can consider a vote on resolution 26-5585, which will approve funding and allow our COO to execute grant agreements. Next slide. So recommended for funding today is a proposal from the City of Tigard. It's called the Tax Increment Finance District Update Project. So this work will update two existing TIF districts in Tigard, the Tigard Triangle, which I think was established in 2017, and Downtown Tigard, which was established in 2008, I believe. Both have been around for a while. Neither has been updated for about 10 years. And so this work will generate recommendations for potential boundary changes, specific projects and programs, financing plans, really with a focus on improving those economic and housing development outcomes in both of those districts. Also included in this project is a feasibility assessment for potentially establishing a new TIF district in River Terrace 2.0, which is a newly urbanizing area of Tigard that was brought into the urban growth boundary in 2021. And if the feasibility assessment indicates that a TIF district is a recommended funding strategy for River Terrace 2.0, then the city would likely come back with another grant application next year to implement that work. They have requested $111,000 for this project. Next slide. The other application we received was from the City of River Grove, and I put this slide in here for context because while all of you probably know where and what the City of River Grove is, I had to Google it. They have a population of 645 people, so it's a really tiny little community right along the Tualatin River, north of Tualatin and south of areas of Lake Oswego and unincorporated Clackamas County. Next slide. So River Grove submitted a grant application to do pretty significant zoning code and comprehensive plan updates, essentially to remove barriers to development and redevelopment. Their existing code and comp plan are really outdated, inconsistent. They've been sort of updated in this patchwork fashion over the last 20 years, and it's created a lot of confusion. Applicants and developers have a really hard time understanding what requirements need to be met. Their planning commission has a really hard time enforcing and interpreting. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And our screening committee recognized and appreciated that work, but they did recommend some revisions to their application to clarify their scope and budget and to establish a more sort of reasonable project phasing, potentially splitting this into two grants instead of one big one. And also to sort of better describe how the work that River Grove is proposing is meeting Metro's more regional goals for livable, equitable communities. So they are receiving technical support now. They are planning to resubmit for the second quarter cycle. Those applications are due tomorrow. So you'll be seeing that one next quarter, or next time we're back in front of you. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Hal.
Okay, so just to summarize next steps, so we're here today for the council discussion and vote on the resolution 26-5585. We are bringing forth just one project for funding with a total amount of $110,000. That's for the Tigard TIF district update. Once council approves, we can enter into an IGA with the City of Tigard and that work can move forward. We are expecting multiple grant applications for the next cycle. Again, that's due tomorrow. And then council will consider awards for the second quarter in late June. The last thing that we want to emphasize is that we want to provide a summary of we are working on assessing outcomes and impacts for the 2040 grant program, and we'll bring a summary back to council in June, but we're working on a more comprehensive assessment of the 2040 grant program. The program has been around for 20 years. I think there's a lot of data and stories that we want to share about the impact and the outcomes of the program. So with that, our presentation is complete.
Any questions?
Colleagues, any questions?
None here.
Councilor Nolan.
Mr. Chair, thanks. On the request from River Grove, can you tell us the dollar amount they requested?
Yes, $560,000, give or take.
Okay. And one of the slides said that the entire city is zoned for single-family housing.
Yeah, the entire city is zoned for single-family housing. They also have significant portions of like floodway overlays because of their, proximity to the river.
And their intent is to rewrite their zoning code to update it. Can you give us a sense of what they mean by updating it? Do they want to allow duplexes, fourplexes? Under state law, they have to allow a second residence on a lot. But you mentioned in your comments about consistency with Metro's goals. And one of our goals is density. So I'm having a hard time understanding why we would consider spending $500,000 on an area that essentially wanted single family, I assume detached housing?
That's their current zoning, yeah. And thank you, Councilor Nolan. You basically sort of summarized the concerns from the screening committee when they were evaluating this application. The other thing that I didn't mention in my earlier presentation was that one of the other reasons that the city feels that they need to do these pretty significant code and comp plan updates is that they are not currently consistent with state and regional rules, state statutes. So part of this work was also, will also be to bring them into compliance with applicable rules that have come into place in the last 10 or 15 years.
Did we tell them that we expect them to open up for more dense development?
I think that they expect to explore that as part of this work. You'll see when they come back for with their revised application, that application is going to be a greatly reduced amount of money and a scope that is really specific to doing an audit and an assessment of their existing code and comp plan to really identify where the issues are and lay out an action plan for making those changes to fixing the problems. And I think in that assessment and in that evaluation, they're going to be looking at what changes they need to make to their only zone, their residential zone, to sort of bring that into bring that into compliance with any applicable rules, but also think about how they can be better supporting Metro's regional goals for housing and housing production. So the project that will come to you in Q2 is really going to be this assessment, this audit, and an action plan for moving forward. And then they will plan on a phase 2 application next year to implement whatever is recommended through this first phase audit.
Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to speak to River Grove as well. I think that it's important to recognize that the city of River Grove rarely considers themselves a city. I think they have found incredible success in working with our Parks Department because parks and access to the river is why all these folks are willing to work collectively together as a city. Otherwise, they like the look and feel of being unincorporated. And that is a real risk right now. I think the city council is having discussions about the future financial stability of a small city. And I would like us to be highly motivated to help them because I do think it's important to keep them incorporated and striving to be a city. They're never going to have full services. They're never going to have a commercial zone. They are right between a river and a highway. I think we can just work with them to have the best city services that include livability, that include safety, good street planning, good residential planning. So I would just advocate for us giving them the best technical support we can.
Yes, thank you for that. I will also note this is the first time that they have applied for a 2040 grant, and I would expect that, this is probably a unique opportunity for us to give them that kind of support. So we're working with them.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Acting President Wong. I think it's a big deal that it's their first time applying, for sure. And like Councilor Lewis, I feel this urgency to support them, to make sure that we can give them, resources to do this work. It's definitely a big deal. Even reading through not their application, but through the attachment to the agenda that you shared with us in terms of kind of the scope, the diagnosing of the problem, I think it's important to make sure that every city, every neighborhood in the region has the tools to build the housing that creates, affordability and things like that. So I think it's super important. And I just was looking through the City of River Grove's website, actually. It's actually very navigable, so I appreciate that. I went into their planning section. I thought this was really interesting that, yes, all of their homes are single-family residential, but in their code, they have a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. It's like the first bullet point that's in there. And so I just applaud them for wanting to bring more tools to help to look at what does it mean for our region to be a 21st century region that builds different kinds of housing and creates different kinds of opportunities. And I really hope that in this next phase of their application, we are looking to, Councilor Nolan's point, the density, the infill, the creation of more kind of economic mobility for folks. And hopefully it means for them, their city growing as well and welcoming more people, given their kind of geographical constraints. So, and also in the notes, I noticed they don't have any planning staff at all. And so the fact that they're contracting this out, I know it's a big deal, and this is exactly why Metro exists. I mean, cannot think of a better example of why this grant program exists, and very much looking forward to us showing up with some resources and helping that community come together and do this visioning work, and I'm excited to see the outcome. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, they work with a contract planning firm, and they have for a number of years. And so we've been working with that firm and one of our on-call planning consultants to help them do the scoping and get their narrative in place. Because, as you said, they don't have planning staff. They have a part-time city manager who is managing this. So they need a lot of consultant support, and they need a lot of our support.
Yeah. Great.
I have a question on the Tigard application. I've been very involved with development of TIF districts in East Portland, and we know kind of the potential impacts that TIF can have, right? And it's what is the level of community control and decision-making? What are the impacts potentially on gentrification and displacement? So I know those are kind of very well documented and thought through in East Portland, and I assume in River Terrace 2.0, those aren't the same concerns, because it's really about building a new neighborhood subdivision type thing. So you're not really focused on anti-displacement. You're how do we build? Am I characterizing that correctly? I would just want to know what kind of community elements of control there would be in the Tigard TIF district and things like that. So if that's something that they're going to be talking about. I think one of the dangers of a TIF district is, private developers get a nice handout and make a bunch of money and no one else really benefits. So I'm just wondering what kind of controls that are being considered, because TIF is a tool, can be used well or poorly.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for you now. I think there is some language in their application that touches on that. I'd be happy to forward that to you and dig around and see what I can find. And you're right that, I think there's a big difference in approach whether you're looking at the existing TIF districts that have been there for a while, or you're looking at a new one in River Terrace 2.0 that is, developing, urbanizing. But I don't know that I have a specific answer for you about how those controls are being implemented in this process right now. But I can get one.
Yeah, Chair Wong, can I ask a follow-up question to that? Tigard has been one of the holders of like the Southwest Corridor Equitable Development Strategy as well. So did they talk about that kind of in their application? I know that they've been one of the cities in the region that has really been, aggressive and risk-taking in a good way around this work. So I am actually really curious to see what those connections are, and if we approve the grant, do we have the ability to still kind of influence and offer recommendations to them to implement that if that's not in there? Or what would the right mechanism be to do that? There's a great line of questioning there.
I think what would be the path is I can forward you their application that has their scope of work in it, or I can dig through it and pull out some pieces that I think would be helpful. If you approve the grant, then our next step will be to finalize scoping, that specific elements of scope get put in there and become part of our executed agreement with them. So that would be my recommendation is let's get a little bit more information. I can ask them directly for more information if that might be the easiest thing to do. And then if there are pieces that counselors feel should be added to their scope, then we can do that as we're moving through that process to get under agreement with them.
I think I'm comfortable with moving forward. I do see the development potential and how it could be highly beneficial. I just don't want us to make the same mistakes in TIF districts. And if it's just a different context, that's understandable. Like an urban environment with historically, marginalized community that's there is different from a greenfield type thing. I just don't know. But I think if you're able to infuse kind of those lessons and kind of our racial equity strategy along with that, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think when the original TIF district was set up in Tigard, of course, there was a lot of planning for the Southwest Corridor, which would have impacted that. And a lot of the growth since then, of course, we've put in subsidized housing. Viewfinder is in that district. I think it's entirely appropriate for them to reevaluate that since nobody's talking about extending the Southwest Corridor into that area at this point in time, but that is pretty much a dormant process and we don't have the funding for it. So I think it's appropriate, but I think it's appropriate, as you pointed out, that when they do a scoping, that we have a review and input into that scoping so that it meets the general goals that we have for the area. But personally, I support it because I think it's something that's probably necessary considering the change that's gone on in the Tigard area, and they still have a lot of land and a lot of development opportunities in that area.
I think TIF is a powerful tool, but it has to be done right because it's a lot of examples of not going well. So I just want to highlight that. Okay, is there a motion on resolution number 26-5585?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Okay, it's moved by Councilor Gonzalez, seconded by Councilor Rosenthal. Any further discussion? Okay, Georgia, will you please call the roll?
Councilor Simpson is no longer here. Councilor Nolan?
Yes.
Councilor Gonzalez?
Aye.
Councilor Lewis?
No.
Councilor Rosenthal?
Aye.
Metro Council President Wong?
Aye. The motion passes. And I guess we'll look forward to further conversation with you and hopefully getting some updates on this.
We'll follow up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, seeing no further discussion, the council meeting is adjourned. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, April 16th at 10 a.m.